Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. And let me just say how delightful it is to have people here in person at the White House for a historic event about fusion energy. Thank you all for joining us today, and to those joining us virtually as well. Our teams have been working very hard on this day for many months, so I'm tremendously grateful and glad that you all are able to be here. Thanks especially to my OSTP colleagues, Sally Benson, Costa Samaras, and Rachel Relfi, for all of the work that went into the planning of this event. I am Alondra Nelson. I lead the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy here, and we work to maximize the benefits of science and technology to advance health, prosperity, justice, and security for all Americans. And those principles and those words are in our founding charter from 1976, and we've been doing that work ever since. As you know, President Biden, from President Biden on down, throughout the Biden-Harris administration, we are deeply committed to investing in the future of American science and technology. We are also deeply mindful of the long arc of history, how government can come to the table and make long-term plays that have tremendous benefit for the country down the line. As the president says, we can do big things. We've seen it with things like the internet, GPS, and mRNA vaccines, and also, crucially, clean energy technologies. Starting in the 1970s, the United States made investments in energy innovation that are paying massive dividends today in solar, wind, and batteries. We knew then that with the power of the federal government and the ingenuity of the American research community, we could capture the rays of the sun and turn them into power for homes and businesses. We could do the same by harnessing the wind, and we could store power for when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. And today, we're reaping the benefits. Solar and wind power are now among the cheapest sources of electricity, and in many cases cheaper than fossil fuels. But what if we actually could do what the sun does? If we could actually fuse atoms together and create the power of the sun and the stars? Last month, I joined colleagues from the White House and the Department of Energy to visit the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory, where we got to meet some of the leading scientists working on fusion energy today. Together, along with colleagues at other national labs and across the Energy Department, at our leading universities and in private industry, they are unlocking new possibilities for fusion energy. As I said, we're committed to the future of American science and technology, and we believe that when it comes to fusion, the time is now. We believe this for several reasons. Because the pace of discovery has accelerated so much for fusion, with 7 decades of public funding for fusion research leading to major recent scientific developments in recent years. The time is now because private investment is now following where public investment first paved the way. And the time is now because we have in President Biden a leader who's been clear that we will decarbonize our economy by 2050 and that climate science demands it. This is why fusion is one of a much larger suite of clean energy game changers that will help America reach that goal, commensurate with the scale of the climate change that climate change requires. Now is the time for courageous innovation to accelerate fusion energy, and I'm grateful all of you have joined us to inform the development of a 10-year strategy for fusion energy. We're here today because the world is on fire, because the climate crisis is causing people in this country and around the world to be displaced from their homes, their jobs, their communities, because generations before us made bold investments to give us the first solutions to this crisis. President Biden has made it very clear. We must act, and we must act now. So the Biden-Harris administration is mobilizing every possible innovation to save our kids and our planet, every tool to make life better for us all, especially the most vulnerable among us. I'm serving as the leader of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, but I am also its Deputy Director for Science and Society, in which I've led a first-of-its-kind team at OSTP that works to translate the Biden-Harris administration's principles into policy where science and technology intersect with people's lives and communities. And in this work, I've been reminded recently that when Congress created OSTP almost 50 years ago, they wrote some prescient words into our founding statute, and I quote here: While maximizing the beneficial consequences of technology, the government should act to minimize foreseeable injurious consequences, close quote. In that regard, we have to remember that it's not enough to just get the technology right. From day one, we need an inclusive approach to technology development, where every part of our society, especially those who are marginalized or vulnerable, have a say about safety, about jobs, and about facility siting, as well as the opportunity to get the knowledge and skills needed to participate in emerging clean energy industries and benefit from their inventions. Let's make sure that that happens together. So welcome again to the White House, to this historic first ever Fusion Summit. I hope we can all be back here in a decade together to celebrate the star power we have ignited with these conversations today. And talking about star power, and with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the 16th United States Secretary of Energy, a champion of cutting-edge clean energy technologies, Secretary Jennifer Granholm.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your leadership. So glad that DOE is working with OSTP and with so many of those who may be in this room and have interest in this and expertise in it. Obviously, researchers have long believed that fusion can just unlock this new paradigm in energy if we could just crack the code. And as Dr. Nelson said, over the past 7 decades, the national labs and universities have gotten closer and closer, and we all know that we've all been saying, oh, we're just around the corner, we're on the cusp, right? You know, there have been significant breakthroughs delivered, right? In physics, we've developed technologies to allow us to heat and to control plasmas that are 10 times hotter than the center of the sun. But we also know that we've got to manage expectations as well. There's a reason why fusion is hard. It's hard, right? And so it's going to take time, even though we are making amazing progress. We have to be careful about overpromising, and we have to be realistic. So, you know, we believe that we are really making progress. We're seeing close to ignition. We know that this is happening, but we also know that, you know, even when you get close to ignition, it's going to take time before this is commercialized, right? And I think about the president's goal of getting to 100%, for example, clean electricity by 2035, beyond this decadal vision. And wow, it would be amazing if fusion were part of what I call the silver buckshot of, not silver bullet, but silver buckshot of getting to that clean energy future. We hope that's what we're striving for. But by 2050, for sure, this has to happen, which is the goal of getting to net zero. I'll pause here because I see Representative Beyer, Representative Fleischman here. I mean, the bipartisan support for fusion is just so important because we are asking for congressional continued investment in this, and that you too have been such champions of fusion R&D. We're really grateful for that. We also know that it's not just us alone. We know countries around the world are clamoring to get ahead on fusion technology. We know that private sector investment, as was noted, is just booming, $3 billion in private sector investment last year. You know, we've also heard from professors that students are really interested in this, which is very, very exciting. So we can hopefully create a pipeline of the next generation of scientists, too, that are willing to do this. And the landscape around fusion research and development and demonstration, we think, is shifting. And so our strategy has to shift with it, has to change with it. And that's why we are excited to be joining with the Office of Science and Technology Policy to craft a bold vision for this decade of driving commercial fusion toward hopefully acceptance, completion, maybe even deployment. And so we are announcing 2 initial actions, DOE is, toward this effort. First, we are launching an agency-wide, a DOE-wide fusion initiative. And so going forward, DOE is going to be coordinating all fusion energy research under one umbrella to seize the opportunity to advance the technology. I'm excited to announce that Scott is back here, who presently leads ARPA-E's fusion programs. He's going to lead our effort as our senior advisor for fusion energy at DOE. Glad that you're here, Scott. And second, today we are announcing our first contribution to this vision is that we're announcing a funding opportunity announcement of $50 million today for basic fusion energy research that will support the design for a fusion plant, a pilot fusion plant. So that's today. It's not enough, it's a start, but we just want to make sure we are putting our money where our mouth is. Our effort with OSTP is going to be focused on more than just innovation, though, and this is really important. It's about building out a fusion energy workforce that looks like America, that's diverse, that's equitable, that's inclusive, and super important, we want to make sure that we are establishing trust in this technology among the public, because we know communities might not be thrilled about having a facility next to them that houses an energy source that is as powerful as the sun. We get it. That is a legitimate concern, obviously. And so it's really important for us to emphasize that commercial fusion is going to have an extremely high threshold for safety. And we'll need to engage community leaders on that and other stakeholders early and often to make that really clear. We need to listen to their concerns. We need to show them that safety and security and open communication is going to be the foundation of this industry, not just a sidecar. So we're starting right now. So I'm eager to launch, and I'm eager to work with the partners inside of government and with stakeholders outside of government as well. And one of the great stakeholders inside of government is my friend, the indomitable, I think she's up there, the inimitable Gina on this St. Patrick's Day, McCarthy. Gina, you there?
I am, Madam Secretary, and happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody. It's really great to be able to join you, although I wish I could have been there in person. But I'm really excited about the summit today and to have Dr. Nelson in her new leadership position. It is really an exciting moment in time. And I think that Dr. Nelson is just a terrific addition to the Biden-Harris team. And of course, my friend and colleague, Secretary Granholm, is really, truly a magnificent secretary, no matter what number she is. And she is carrying a great weight on her shoulders and doing it with grace and smarts and dignity and energy that's just unmatched. But you all know that President Biden understands, as all of us do gathered here today, that we have to take strong action on climate now if we ever hope to meet this climate head on. And we are going to do just that. But we have to be smart. We have to take actions that present huge opportunities for us, as well as opportunities for the planet. We need really lasting opportunities so we can create millions of good paying jobs. We can tackle the injustice that we have in this world by investing and engaging wisely. And we can lead the world with new energies and innovation. And that is exactly what we are doing and why we are gathered today. We have to act on climate change so our country can win the 21st century economy. And that's what fusion helps to present us with. Tremendous opportunities as well as challenges, we know. You know, in his first year in office, President Biden mobilized every federal agency to tackle the climate crisis. He committed the U.S. to achieving 100% carbon-free electricity. Yes, carbon, Secretary Granholm, carbon-free electricity by 2035 and reaching net zero emissions no later than 2050. But to do this, we have to fast track the climate solutions that are available to us right now, like more solar projects on public lands, like the launch of a new American offshore wind industry, and electric vehicle manufacturing right here in America. And we have seen tremendous progress so far. And thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're upgrading our power grid. We're building out a national electric vehicle charging network so people don't have range anxiety. We're improving public transit and cleaning up legacy pollution. We know we need lots of efforts moving forward. And as a result, the federal government itself is walking the walk. We're leading the way by electrifying our vehicles and our buildings, as we should. So I'm glad to be here with all of you at the launch of what could be another American clean energy game changer, fusion energy. Fusion energy could provide a virtually limitless source of clean electricity and heat, available when and where it's needed. Getting fusion technology to viability could be a critical tool for reducing emissions while meeting our clean energy needs. And of course, we could create really good jobs in the process. That's why this administration, as Secretary Granholm just said, is all in on this issue. And as Dr. Nelson mentioned, I recently traveled with her and leaders from DOE to the Princeton the Fusion Physics Lab, where we met with some of the scientists working hard in advancing fusion energy. It was exciting to see how the US is really involved in technologies of the future just like this. But we know we have to do it right. And that's why it's important to heavily engage a broad set of stakeholders from the very beginning so we can all better understand the technology and articulate in plain language, which is really hard for scientists sometimes, especially those involved in technologies as intricate and as difficult to explain as this one, but we have to articulate it in plain language so people understand the benefits as well as any of those risks, and make sure we center equity every step of the way. You know, it was exciting to be at Princeton with Dr. Nelson and others because they understood these issues. They raised them to us. They talked about the challenges ahead, not just the benefits that they hope to accrue from this new technology. And they talked about the way that they plan to engage the community moving forward, already having done that within the school and beyond, but recognizing that everybody needs to buy into these solutions. And if we invest wisely, we will bring everybody with us and move these technologies forward. And this technology holds tremendous promise. And if done right, it can distinguish itself as a better choice among many choices moving forward on how we're going to address climate change and keep people's costs down and the jobs growing. So we are in a decisive decade right now, and we need to advance bold climate action, both by deploying the technologies we already have, which Secretary Granholm never fails to mention. Lots and lots of them are available to us, but we also have to be a bit of a cheerleader on how America can grow as a clean energy innovation hub. We need to help achieve the president's bold climate goals, and you're helping to do that. So thanks everybody for gathering. Again, I wish I could be with you, and make sure you celebrate the green today. Happy St. Patrick's Day. And with that, I'll turn the mic back to Dr. Nelson.
Gina, happy St. Patrick's Day to you and all. Great, you are here. You're not here, but you are here. Thank you for those wonderful, energizing remarks. It is now my pleasure to introduce the chair of the Council of Environmental Quality, Brenda Mallory.
Good morning, everyone. It is such a pleasure to be here, and I find myself often following Gina and Secretary Granholm, and both always get me so inspired I forget that I have a role here. So it's such a pleasure to be here and to be part of this very important event. So thank you, Alondra, just for that introduction. And I should say to everyone in the room, good morning from the White House. It is such a pleasure to have real people sitting in the same room with me and had the opportunity to just exchange on this particular issue, which I think is so important. So let me start first with the Council on Environmental Quality. We have the role of coordinating the federal government's efforts to improve, preserve, and protect America's environment, public lands, and health. So while capturing the power of fusion energy here on Earth is thrilling science, it presents both promise and pause to the communities. By working to integrate environmental justice on the front end of development, we have a chance to ensure that fusion energy benefits all communities and does not repeat harmful mistakes that have happened in the past. Earlier this month, President Biden became the first president to use the words environmental justice in a State of the Union address. This was significant because it reaffirmed the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to put interests of communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution at the center of our environmental and climate policy. Today is a reminder that we must center them in our energy policy as well. Frontline and fence line communities, especially in areas that have historically produced fossil fuel American uses, know all too well how energy development can disproportionately impact our most vulnerable citizens. Over the past year, we have begun the hard work of alleviating the environmental burdens that so many communities are experiencing. Through unprecedented investments in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we are replacing lead pipes, accelerating Superfund cleanups, cleaning up abandoned mines and oil wells, protecting most vulnerable communities from fires, floods, and storms. And agencies are banning toxic pesticides, confronting persistent pollutants, cutting tailpipe pollution, and cleaning up the air we breathe. The federal government is once again holding polluters accountable by enforcing our environmental laws. And because of that, it is truly a breath of fresh air to talk today about a technology that is zero emissions, a technology that holds the promise to be reliable and bountiful enough to meet America's and the world's growing clean electricity needs. In addition to working to alleviate the pollution and climate change risks that disproportionately fall on low-income communities and communities of color, the president has directed us to confront a legacy of underinvestment in communities that for far too long have been left behind. We are doing so through the Justice 40 initiative, which seeks to direct 40% of the overall benefits of climate, clean energy, and other federal investments to disadvantaged communities. Across the government, we are working to transform hundreds of federal programs to ensure they reach communities that are overburdened, underserved, and marginalized. The administration has prioritized clean energy development and workforce development in rural communities, in disadvantaged communities, and in areas historically dependent on fossil fuel economies. So it's exciting today to talk about a whole new industry that you and so many others are poised to create. And right at the beginning, the very first summit asked the question, how can we ensure all communities can benefit from the transformational change we hope to spur along today? So with that, I just am grateful that you all are here. I'm grateful for this effort going forward, and I will turn the mic back over to Alondra.
So in his State of the Union address, the president offered for us a unity agenda and reminded us that there are things that we agree upon. And fusion energy is one of these things, and we are absolutely delighted to have two members of Congress here with us to talk, to offer some remarks. So first, I would like to introduce Congressman Don Beyer of Virginia, who is chair of the Bipartisan House Fusion Caucus. Thank you, Congressman Beyer.
Good morning. Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And that light came from fusion energy. All of the fossil fuel we burn was created by light from fusion. Every atom heavier than hydrogen in our body and in our world was created by fusion. We are made of stardust. To those skeptics who believe that fusion energy is impossible, there are 100 billion stars in our galaxy and 2 trillion observable galaxies in our observable universe, and every single one of them is powered by fusion energy. Gravity gives us fusion, and fusion gives us life. You know, we will always worry about peak oil and peak coal and peak natural gas. No one ever worries about peak seawater. So good morning, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this existentially exciting summit on commercial fusion energy. I'm thrilled that these important discussions at the White House with all the big brass from our national stuff. And we can successfully forge a path to successful fusion energy. Secretary Granholm, thank you for your agency-wide fusion initiative. Thank you for the $100 million, $50 million. I'm sure there will be people who will take this here today. Fusion is the holy grail of climate change and decarbonized future. But even more important, I think, and more profoundly, fusion has the potential to lift more citizens of the world out of poverty than anything since the invention of fire. I started the Fusion Energy Caucus about this time last year. We have more than 50 members, Democrats and Republicans. I'm thrilled that my good friend and co-leader, Chuck Fleischman, is here. Our mission as a caucus is to educate the members of Congress, and more importantly, their staffs, about the breakthroughs, the research, and the increasing potential of fusion energy to transform the global energy sector. But it's even more important to let the public know about this. I try to include this in every speech, really in every conversation, to continue the process of teaching what fusion energy is not, Chernobyl, Fukushima, and what it actually is. Another part of our mission in the caucus is to try to pull the legislative levers we have at our disposal to advance this agenda. To that end, we've held a Science, Space, and Technology Committee hearing. The caucus has had several briefings with many of the experts here in this room. And we've had several iterations of funding and authorizations for fusion programs pass the House this year and in the last year. This includes, but isn't limited to, historic investments in the DOE Science for the Future Act and the forthcoming Innovation and Competitiveness Package, which is now on its 5th or 6th name. That is via the Competes, USEEK, or whatever. It's now being conferenced in the House, and it'll authorize over $6.4 billion in critical fusion energy research and development over the next 5 years. And I'm perhaps most heartened by the historic funding we just secured for the fusion program in the FY22 Omnibus Spending Package. Chuck is an appropriator and is a critical part of putting that into place. And the President just signed it, I think, yesterday. With these investments, DOE will initiate a new milestone-based public-private partnership and continue the important research and construction work happening in the DOE's Office of Fusion Energy Sciences. As we turn to the 2023 budget, though, it's essential that the administration include a strong request for the DOE Office of Science, where the fusion programs are housed. I hope that this request, which will come on the heels of the event today, will reflect the robust funding needed to continue U.S. leadership in fusion energy and push forward our goal of commercialization. This is essential, and I cannot stress this point strongly enough. Cynics have often suggested that over the decades, we've spent just enough money on fusion that it never happens. This administration has changed that, and we want to celebrate that and really be thankful. So I'm honored to be here with the pioneers of the next great leap for humanity. Thank you for your leadership and your vision. I look forward to hearing your lively discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman Beyer. Finally, I'd like to introduce Congressman Chuck Fleischman of Tennessee, who is a member of the bipartisan House Fusion Caucus. Thank you.
Dr. Nelson, thank you. Madam Secretary, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Personal note of thanks, I want to thank the Secretary. She has come to Oak Ridge and visited what I think is the greatest DOE reservation in the country, our great national lab, our Y12 UPF project, and of course our legacy cleanup, which is so critically important environmentally all around the country. So, Madam Secretary, thank you. To my colleague, Congressman Beyer, thank you so much for coming up with this great idea. I would like to, before I get into my prepared remarks, talk a little bit about the caucus venues in Congress. Congressman Beyer came up with an idea for the Fusion Caucus. He came as a Democrat to me, a Republican, and said, would you join me in this? I actually co-chair the National Labs Caucus with my friend from Illinois, Mr. Foster. I'm actually the chair of the less than glamorous but very important Nuclear Cleanup Caucus, which is so important, cleaning up legacy waste in so many communities around the country. You'd be surprised when I go into rooms, and as Don alluded to in his speech, certain things that he brings up, I bring up the caucus venues because it's incredible. You get Republicans and Democrats, senators and House members in a room in a caucus environment, and so many of the partisan edges just fade away. It's amazing how well we can work together. And Don, I look forward to working with you on Fusion. A little bit about me. I represent the people of the 3rd District of Tennessee and have done so for over a decade. I am from Chattanooga, a city in the South. The Secretary has been kind enough to visit there as well. But little did I know a city called Oak Ridge was going to be and has been in my district since my tenure in Congress. What an opportunity. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and yes, I am biased. I love all of the national labs, all 17 of them. But seriously, the Oak Ridge National Lab is a multi-purpose national lab. It is strong on every front. Everything a national lab does, we do at Oak Ridge, and it's truly incredible, including fusion energy. So I think Dr. Zachariah is watching us today. We have people from the lab here. Appreciate that. We also have people, if you'll excuse me, I did not wear the green today. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone, but I am a Tennessee Vol, so I have my orange on, and UT is here physically, and I appreciate that so much. And I think we're playing later today. Talked about what I do in Congress. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, I'm always going to be in the minority in Congress. People look at me and say, what are you talking about? Why? Because I am an appropriator. Don, my good friend, is an authorizer. Many of my friends on my side of the aisle, most of them, are authorizers. And on the other side of the aisle are authorizers. Why is it so important about appropriations? We are always going to be in that minority, but we fund the key missions. And yes, thank you, Don, for talking about the omnibus bill, the 22 omnibus bill, which I voted for as a Republican, okay? I thought that was very important. And what did we do? Critically important, $713 million in fiscal 22 for funding for fusion energy sciences. That's a tremendous accomplishment, and that speaks to the strong bipartisan, bicameral, and executive support for those missions, including $45 million to get the fusion cost share program off the ground. Madam Secretary, you're right. It's not enough, but it is a start. Candidly, as you know, I am a fission person by nature. I am co-chair of the Advanced Nuclear Caucus, another caucus in Congress, and I'm very passionate about nuclear energy, and so pleased that Secretary has been so strong in her support of that. And that is where we are now. But I really think the future is in fusion, and I think we can't overlook this. Right in my own district, we've got a company, and I think I see them here today, General Fusion, is actually going to put their national headquarters in Oak Ridge, and I so appreciate that. So Oak Ridge is ready. Oak Ridge National Laboratory, our community is ready to be there to work with our colleagues in Princeton and around the country on fusion energy. But I do really believe it's the future. A few specifics that I'd like to talk about. I have worked and voted for the ITER project, which is in France. The United States owns about 9% of that. and has worked on that for years. That's been a haul, candidly, to get funded throughout both Democratic and Republican administrations. And I think that's very important that we continue to work and to fund that. But where is the key work being done? At ORNL, okay? You can see where my bias is. Now, we certainly appreciate all of our other friends working on this in Princeton and at MIT. I had dinner with my friend, former Secretary of Energy Ernie Moniz, a few weeks back, and we talked about fusion. And there's great agreement on these issues. So look forward to working with you all. Let me be a little bit more specific before I conclude my remarks so that you know what we're doing. ITER is already delivering practical experience with supply chains, regulations, and building integration systems for a reactor-scale fusion plant. This is invaluable for a path to commercial fusion energy. Several key developments from the past year. This is how current we are. The first two central solenoid modules for the superconducting magnet at the heart of ITER were delivered to the ITER site in southern France. ORNL fusion experts contributed to diagnostic technology behind the new fusion record set by the Joint European Torus in 2021. JET was able to document the generation of 59 megajoules of sustained fusion power, more than doubling the previous 1997 record. The Material Plasma Exposure Experiment, MPEX, under construction at ORNL, will deliver expanded materials science capabilities and will be capable of producing fusion reactor relevant plasma conditions for materials and component study. I could go on and talk about this. Bottom line, we need a bicameral, bipartisan, in fact, I would argue nonpartisan commitment to fusion energy. I am so glad that as we work, and Madam Secretary, you are probably, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, you're the 5th Secretary of Energy with whom I've worked, and it's a privilege and a pleasure. We can work together to get this done. And let me make this clear, whether it's fission, fusion, nuclear energy, the world is very competitive. Our foes and our friends are in this venue. And I want the United States to continue to do what we have done from Oak Ridge from the inception of the Manhattan Project, to lead in fusion energy as we do in other forms of sustainable energy. Thank you. It's been a privilege.
Thank you, Congressman Beyer and Fleischman, for your leadership. So let's get underway. OSTP and the Department of Energy have planned an amazing fusion energy summit today. We'll hear from a range of panelists about this exciting technology that can unlock clean energy possibilities. Our summit will continue shortly after this video. Thank you all.
Hi, I'm Scott Shue. I'm Program Director at ARPA-E, as Secretary Granholm mentioned earlier, and I am very honored and excited to begin my new role soon as Senior Advisor for Fusion in the DOE. Before we jump into our three exciting panel discussions, we would first like to show a 5-minute video with acknowledgments to the DOE team. This video introduces Fusion and DOE's very long-standing investments in fusion R&D and support that brought us to this very exciting moment. So our colleagues will hopefully cue the video.
Global energy consumption is predicted to double by the year 2050. Meeting this demand using clean energy sources will require a bold leap. Fortunately, there is a technology that offers the potential for limitless energy with no carbon emissions. More than 99% of the visible universe is an energetic state of matter called plasma. Through the process of fusion, charged particles in plasma collide and release energy. Fusion is the fundamental source of energy in the universe and fuels stars like the sun. Harnessing fusion on Earth has been a goal of scientists and nations for decades. In the United States, the Department of Energy has led a long history of fusion research, beginning in the mid-20th century, when our predecessor, the Atomic Energy Commission, founded laboratories and programs to pursue fusion energy. A new scientific field was born, one requiring physicists, engineers, and mathematicians. The commitment to fusion energy in the United States and abroad has charted a course that envisions fusion power on the grid in the 21st century. To produce energy on the scale of a typical power plant, scientists today aim to build a fusion device that generates a self-heating plasma using a tiny amount of fuel. This journey began in the 1950s and 60s as scientists tested fundamental fusion concepts. Since then, they have developed a range of fusion devices and discovered other applications. To produce the energy gains needed for a power plant, a fusion device must meet some extraordinary conditions. The plasma in a device must reach extreme temperatures, up to 10 times the temperature at the center of the sun. So scientists demonstrated these enormous temperatures in laboratory experiments. The plasma must also be concentrated enough for many particles to collide at the same time. So scientists devised ways to stabilize and confine higher concentrations of plasma. The device itself must confine the hot, concentrated plasma long enough to produce useful energy. So scientists developed stronger magnets to confine and control the plasma for longer times at larger facilities. Today, government labs, universities, and companies are advancing many different concepts for a fusion power plant based on decades of DOE research. One concept, called magnetic confinement, has been the focus of major international efforts. Another concept is inertial confinement, which uses lasers or other methods to compress and ignite a small target of fuel in billionths of a second. Through the space age into the information age, fusion research became a driving force for developing new technologies with applications in manufacturing, medicine, and more. For example, scientists used plasma to develop smaller, more powerful computer chips. Meanwhile, fundamental research provided new insight into planets, stars, and the universe. Technology development also advanced the goal of practical fusion energy, resulting in new superconducting magnets and tools for understanding plasma and device performance. In the 1990s, 2 experiments, one in the United States and one in Europe, broke a string of fusion performance records. These experiments tested an abundant fuel known as deuterium-tritium, which are 2 forms of hydrogen. Deuterium is derived from seawater, and tritium can be made in a fusion plant from lithium. The end of the 20th century saw the initiation of the world's largest fusion collaboration, which includes the United States. The ITER device, now under construction in France, is expected to make its first plasma later this decade. Today, as part of DOE, U.S. fusion researchers have access to some of the world's top facilities in materials science and high-performance computing, which are key to fusion development. DOE manages 2 modern magnetic confinement facilities where scientists conduct experiments and share data. The department also leads an inertial confinement fusion program that uses high-powered lasers and pulsed power. And U.S. researchers collaborate abroad, connecting them to fusion innovations around the globe. There are more than 130 experimental fusion devices worldwide and counting. With surging private sector investment in the United States and emerging breakthroughs in science and technology, fusion experts agree now is the time for a bold decadal mission to bring fusion to the grid. Now is the time to bring a future of clean, lasting energy to the nation and the world.
Hope everyone enjoyed that video and is properly jazzed up for the remainder of the event. I also want to thank all our government leaders who gave those inspiring remarks. Thank you very much for your leadership and vision. So I guess one moment. So I would like to welcome the first panel. The first panel is on the status and benefits of fusion technology. Panel will be moderated by Dr. Kim Budil, who is the director of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I invite Dr. Budil and the distinguished panelists to the table. Dr. Budil will introduce the panel members.
Welcome to this very exciting event today. I have to say the remarks this morning were incredibly energizing and heartening to me, who has worked in and around this community for a very long time. This really does feel like a special moment in time, and I think this event really highlights that. As we all know, and as this video really highlighted, fusion energy is the grand scientific challenge of our time, and it's going to require significant innovation and real leadership to realize it. It grew out of a long tradition of American leadership in this field, growing out of our national security programs and expanding into energy programs. And I think that synergistic pursuit of many approaches is a key characteristic for why we're at this exciting moment in time. It has been a great year for fusion. We've had enormous breakthroughs in both magnetic fusion and in inertial fusion that really make it realistic. We used to always say fusion energy was 50 years away from whatever day you asked. And I would say that is closing fast. So really an exciting time. As the US and the world start thinking about net zero energy, fusion energy has a real potential to contribute. The urgency and the scale of this challenge really demand that we work differently. We need partnerships. We need to bring our colleagues in universities, the national laboratories, private industry, and the utilities together. And we need to work with communities. I think the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and energy justice is really important in this. We want to start from a great foundation and build from there. And for me, diversity is really essential to excellence and innovation. It's not something that's a nice to have in this environment. And we need to build a workforce that reflects the communities that will ultimately benefit from this technology. So with that, I'd like to get started by talking a little bit about what is new in fusion and what is different now. But first, I'm going to briefly introduce my distinguished panelists. I'm very excited to sit here with all of them. To my right is Dr. Kathy McCarthy. She's the Associate Laboratory Director for Fusion and Fission Energy and Science at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, a great national laboratory, as we all heard. Next to her is Dr. Abdullah Darwish, who's the Presidential Professor at Dillard University. Then we have Dr. Ann White, who's Head of Nuclear Science and Engineering at MIT. Then Dr. Stephen Cowley, Director of another fine national laboratory, the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory. And then batting cleanup for us on the end, Mr. Mark Berry, who's the Vice President for Research and Development at the Southern Company. So with that, I'm going to turn to our first question. What is new in fusion and why now? And I'm going to point to my colleague, Dr. Cowley, down the way to start us off.
First, figure out how to turn it on.
It's not like it's fusion, come on.
Yeah, right, exactly. The Secretary said it, fusion is hard. And in some sense, that intimidation has always hung over our field. But fusion is in fact doable. 2021 was an amazing year for fusion. I don't think we've had a year like this ever in the history of fusion. On August the 8th, the National Ignition Facility reached 1.3 megajoules of output with just under 2 megajoules going in. But what was more important about that actual shot was it was the first time that we start to see a fusion burn. A fusion burn is when fusion energy provides the energy to keep the fuel at about 100 million degrees, and you start to see the thing burn just like a fire burns. An astonishing result, actually, and congratulations to Lawrence Livermore Lab for that. And then on the 21st of December, just inside 2021, the Joint European Torus at the Great Lab of Culham in the United Kingdom reached an average of over 10 million watts of fusion power for over 5 seconds, as long as they could sustain it, because the machine gets too hot otherwise. Absolutely remarkable result, an incredible result for that team there, just as the team in Livermore. But how do we get here? How do we get to, being able to actually make fusion fuel at over 100 million degrees and sustain it and get fusion to actually happen, show that fusion is in fact doable? We got here through science, through a program at the Department of Energy that has sustained their scientific inquiry over decades to get to the point which has only really happened, I think, in the last 10 years, where we can really predict the behavior of these systems and calculate it on those enormous computers that the Department of Energy runs. This is actually the step forward that I think is most significant, because if we're now going to accelerate to commercial fusion, we've got a lot to do. It's not straightforward once you've made fusion happen, as we have, to go to commercial fusion. But we have the tools to do it, in that we understand the behavior of a plasma at 100, 200 million degrees and how to hold it. And that is an intellectual triumph, and one that will drive us through to the commercial realization. So I think 2021 was the greatest year of fusion.
I have to agree. Another fine national lab. So Kathy, perhaps you could comment on some of our big experimental facilities.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Another one of the reasons why we're ready to take this big step, move aggressively to commercial fusion, is the knowledge that we've gained through preparing for ITER, through starting the component fabrication, the delivery, the assembly of the different components in southern France. And I'll tie also the recent experiments in JET provided information that validated the physics for ITER. So the fusion program is very international, all these pieces coming together. When you actually design something in detail, when you do the fabrication, you have to write the specifications with very exacting tolerances. That's important for fusion. So what we're learning from the component fabrication for ITER feeds in directly into the design work that will go on for a pilot plant, the actual assembly of the plant. So it's really important, that piece that's coming into the whole big picture of how do we actually get there. In the ITER project, there are a series of fabrication, assembly, commissioning steps that lead up to first plasma, and then post-first plasma as the machine moves towards DT operations and the scientific exploitation that will provide the data to optimize a plant. So we know enough to build a fusion pilot plant. Going that next step to competitive fusion energy, that's a big step. So the information that we'll get from the highly diagnosed machine that is ITER, it has more diagnostics than any other machine, all of that will feed into our readiness, shape what a commercial plant would look like, and ensure that we actually get there.
That's great. Anne, perhaps you'd like to comment?
Off and on again. Okay, now it's on. So this is an extraordinarily special moment, right? And not just because of what we've already heard right now, but also because the community has come together and spoken with an extraordinarily powerful voice that we are ready to move fast for fusion. There was a comprehensive community planning process that happened. That led into a Fusion Energy Sciences Advisory Committee report that laid out a strategic plan, not just for what it takes to push fusion faster with technology, but also to invest in the basic science and the basic research and continue that. This then fed into a National Academies report, aptly titled, Bringing Fusion to the U.S. Grid. And that report put forth a roadmap And one big element of that roadmap is harnessing, right, the interest from the private sector. And that's really exciting because that's pushing the drive for a fusion pilot plant even faster. And from a technical perspective, what's really neat about what's happening in the private sector now is the designs that they're thinking about are compact. They're smaller scale than NIF, smaller scale than ITER. And all these pieces coming together, all the community coming together in these different ways, it's a historical opportunity.
I think that's just right, and it highlights that even though there have been tremendous scientific advances, there is work that remains, significant R&D, and as I was commenting to someone earlier, it's not a simple engineering problem to take this next step, so bringing all these people together will be critically important. So I'd like you to comment on some of the challenges that do persist and your perspective for overcoming them as we start to take these next steps. And Kathy, if you could start us off, please.
Sure. So a key piece that we need in order to move to commercial fusion is what the community calls fusion technology. So we have the ability to produce heat in the plasma. How do you take that heat and turn it into something usable, whether it's electricity or actually process heat? We have in the community what we call a blanket. Fission community does this as well. But the blanket is that component that then extracts that heat and ultimately turns it into something useful. Now, the focus in the program has been on the science, as you've heard, because getting the science right was the key first step. Now what we have to do is look at the fusion technology piece. And as an example, when you look at materials, we're confident that we've got the materials that could be used in a pilot plant. But what we don't have is the materials that would make a practical, economical, commercial plant. They need to withstand very extreme environments for long periods of time. If you take the fission industry as an example, they run over 90% of the time consistently. They run for 18 to 24 months straight and do all their maintenance in about a month-long period. And we've got to look at that as a goal. We can't have lots of shutdowns. If we're going to be replacing components, then we've got to do it in the shortest time scale possible because you have to figure in that big picture. What does commercial fusion mean? Well, it means maximizing the time that the machine is actually running. It means minimizing the costs of running those machines, because in the end, it's going to have to be competitive. So the time is now for these investments in the fusion technology side, and I just mentioned materials as one of them. The fuel cycle is another one. We need to have a sustainable fuel cycle. The experiments now all use more fuel than they actually create, but we have to create more than we actually use in order to make it competitive. So that's another major piece that's necessary. So looking at these machines, figuring out what does the blanket look like, what does the fuel cycle look like, how do the materials withstand this harsh environment, that's a step that's needed, and we need to make investments in that now.
Very good. And I think that another persistent challenge is also the time it can take sometimes for these technologies to be developed and be deployed. And we've got to push fusion faster so that we can impact climate change. And some ways of doing that are getting together more creatively and having more creative partnerships. One example happened at MIT and Commonwealth Fusion Systems. Through a collaboration in just 3 years, they achieved a 20 Tesla magnet made of new high-temperature superconducting material. And this material wasn't really commercially available until about 7 years ago. That's fast. That's fast R&D. That's really fast translation. And that's what we need more of. We need more of these creative ways of pulling partners together, right? So that we can bring all the strengths to bear, the strengths of America's universities, the strengths of our companies, and the strengths of our national labs. And this is really, I think, the thing we've got to get right at this point in time.
I think that's right, and it really highlights the multidisciplinary nature of our field. We saw in the video many of the technologies that have spun out from the fusion community, extreme ultraviolet lithography, laser peening and machining, medical technologies like MRI are built on the technologies from this community. So that spin out effect demonstrates there's been a huge amount of progress.
It's a really, really great point, and we want to make sure we counter a notion that fusion has been too insular. We really have been pushing out science, pushing out technology, pushing out that knowledge, and we've got to bring people in. And really fast-paced, interdisciplinary projects with milestones, it pulls in talent. It's really attractive and exciting.
So perhaps, Professor Darwish, you could comment on the people dimension of this challenge.
One of the challenges really in fusion community is the lack of diversity. For example, if you look at Black, African American, they consist about 4% only from all this, physics graduates. If you go down a little bit, you will find Latinos, 10%. If you look at the big picture, you will find Black females, 1% in physics. So this is a big challenge for us to increase this one. I work at Dillard University. It's a small HBCU at Louisiana, New Orleans. And we are actually one of the top physics program graduating African American in physics in the country. And if you look a little bit for minority females, we are actually number 2 in the United States producing African American females in physics. This is a huge. And this is actually what can make us to think, how can we learn from education system like that? Why a small institution like Dillard University producing that much of African American in physics and African American females in physics? So this is one of the lessons which we need to learn. Other institutions are supposed to come and say, what is exactly you have done? I've been at Dillard University for almost about 24 years. Before that, I was at Alabama A&M University. Yes, he's happy. Alabama A&M University, where I graduated many physics students, PhDs, and master students. And one day I said, you know what? Let's go to a place which does not have actually any research type of energy or something like that, and establish a great program which can be a hub for HBCU to produce minority females, produce males and females, both of them from physics. And this didn't come between day and night. It's over 2 decades, actually. We got this type of national standing to produce African American in physics. The same for nuclear engineering, because in this community, for fusion community, we need everyone to participate, either engineers, either physicists, chemists, everybody. But we need to look at the picture for the United States, how it will be the workforce for everybody. Why it's not too much minority? What can we do to increase the number of minorities actually in that field? Most recently, actually, we got funded by DOE, Insight Center. I am a co-PI for that center with MSU, Michigan State Universities are the leading institution. And that center actually is to train the next generation to have the exact combination of hands-on training and the minds-on training to make them valuable to the society. It's not just about degree or just give them a degree and let's go hunt for a job. It will not happen, because anyone who wants to hire you, they need to find really qualities in you. They need to see that you are investing in this company or that place.
I think that's really, it's harder than you think to push the button. I think that's really interesting, and the impact you've had on the field in helping to diversify the field is really inspiring, so thank you for that. I'd like to turn a little bit toward the partnership ecosystem. We've all highlighted the role of public and private sector investment in driving the field forward. I think that's really important. You know, the public sector has a long horizon. They make long-term commitments to really, really challenging technical problems. And so now we're at a point where we can build and leverage upon that base that was built by the public sector. And then private sector brings energy and urgency to the problem. So those two communities meeting in the middle really is our opportunity to drive this forward. The community we haven't talked about yet is our customer, the utilities. So I'd like to turn to Mr. Mark Berry and ask about your thoughts on the ecosystem and this interplay between public and private sector.
Well, first of all, I want to say how exciting this particular meeting has been thus far. And, you know, your comments earlier about 2021 being a great year in fusion, in my mind, the best year is going to be when you're producing energy and providing that to customers. Clean, safe, affordable, and reliable energy to customers. That is the grand vision. That's why I'm here. As a utility, we are definitely focused and open-minded, and we want to bring this technology to bear so that we can provide that energy to our customers. So, you know, when I think about this particular issue, I think now is the time to expand the public and private partnerships to include the end users. I've heard a lot this morning about how hard fission is. If it's going to be in my industry, it's going to have to be a little bit easier. But we're excited, and we want to be part of that solution to bring this technology to bear. This is not the type of technology that you're going to do the development and then throw it over the fence at the end and expect us to use it. So I think now is the time for the end user to get involved. I think the sooner we do that, the better for us to learn and help you harden your technology so that we get a solution that is robust and fits our needs.
That's really great. So from your perspective, what are some of the performance requirements we should be thinking about?
You know, I want to start my comments, though, with the energy sector is at a crossroads. And when I say energy, I mean that broadly. We've heard about the 2035 vision from President Biden for zero carbon electricity. But when I speak of energy, I think about it much broader. Energy companies have made net zero 2050 commitments, company like mine, Southern Company, and we recognize that we need transformational technologies to bring that future to bear. The 2050 energy company is likely to be very different than the 2020 energy company. We know that we'll need a diverse set of technologies to solve very specific problems. It is my belief that fusion energy could provide base load energy to our customers, and that's something that's very important. Remember, for us as a utility, we want to provide clean, safe, reliable, and affordable energy to our customers. If we want to accelerate that future, and I hear at this meeting today, many want that, I think it's time to broaden the public-private partnership to include the end user.
I think that's just right, and I think that's why we're here today, now. We're at a point where we can start building realistic partnerships across that full spectrum. So coming back to that theme of now is the time for us, what's really different now from 25 years ago, and how can we take advantage of this moment? So I'll turn again to you, Steve.
I think what's different now is people have a vision that we can actually deliver a commercial product, right? And the advent of private funding in fusion on a level that exceeds the public funding is going to transform the pace at which we move towards the end point. So I think that's a huge part of why we're here today, right? That's going to transform the way we're doing things. I would also back up on what Mark said there a little bit. Fusion is really a perfect energy source because not only could it do the base load, but in a world in which renewables are going to play a huge role in our future, we need firm energy sources, ones that you can switch on when the wind don't blow and the sun don't shine. Never shines in Britain. And fusion can be that, right? We've just got to develop it.
That's great. Kathy?
So one of the things that we're seeing is disruptive technologies. One of the great things about having all these different entities looking at fusion, moving fusion forward, and this is all part of diversity, people looking at things from different perspectives. So disruptive technologies are important. You heard a little bit about the high temperature superconducting magnets and the progress that has been made there. We heard a little bit about the computing that makes so many things possible, supercomputers, speeds that we never thought possible. All of these things are really important, and that's what we need to do. We've got to think out of the box. We've got to bring all these partners together, think out of the box. How do we do these things better? And it's going to take all of that for fusion.
I think that's right, and I think one reason you're seeing such a large presence from the Department of Energy National Labs is because we're home to some of the key tools that will be really important to this whole ecosystem. So we have the large-scale experimental facilities and computational tools that can help drive these partnerships forward. And it's not just facilities like ITER and NIF that can explore the physics at scale. It's our light sources and neutron sources to learn about materials and develop new materials, and our computing capabilities, which we can make broadly accessible, that will soon be at the exascale, allowing us to really tackle some of these incredibly vexing problems. So we're not the only ones who are pursuing fusion. The international community has made big investments in this science and technology. So I'm interested in your perspective on the competition and what opportunities for collaboration you see on the horizon.
Fusion has always been very, very international. It's one of the things that attracted me to the field in graduate school. Being able to have the opportunity to work with the greatest minds from around the world is key. And what you'll find is the scientists, the engineers, we all work together very, very well. We'll let other people worry about the politics. But we've had long-standing collaborations, not just with ITER, but with the UK, with Korea, with Europe, with Japan. I've probably not mentioned all of them. All of that gives us practical experience, access to that expertise, and these people working together. That's really how we're going to be able to move all of this forward. So these international partnerships are key. We benefit to them. We benefit from them. That you can't underestimate the practical experience of working with an operating machine, with actually fabricating components, because you learn so much. So these international collaborations, bringing together best minds, this is what we've got to continue moving forward. Steve?
If we don't choose to do fusion, somebody else will, right? There are very well-funded programs in China, in Europe, in Korea, doing marvelous things. We don't want somebody else to be the Saudi Arabia of fusion. We want to be it.
That is a great soundbite for the day. Yeah. So I want to turn to another set of topics that we have discussed, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is critically important to this field, which is making strides, but there is more to be done. And I'm interested in some proactive steps that, as a community, we could take to really advance the cause of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field of fusion. And I'll start with you, Professor Darwish.
Yes. Now it is time. We have
You have to turn your...
Yeah, I'm sorry. And now it is time, and always it is time. We have been talking about fusion energy, and this may be about 50 some years ago. And we are saying that it will happen, and maybe it will happen after 10, 20, 30 again. We don't know. But who's going to lead? Who's going to lead? So diversity is so important to bring everyone to the table. Everyone has to be part of this major task force. When this is happening, somebody will lead, because who knows, I will not be here. So, but somebody actually has to lead. So what can we do? What can be done? We have to start early. We have to start actually from K to 12. We have to introduce this type of technology to them. We have to revamp the curriculum from K to 12. We have to introduce a strong science program there. You go to the high school, middle school, they say, well, physics is a part which hard, you cannot take it. If you need to take it, then this is something else. But we need actually to inject actually this science early on to those kind of students which will be leaders for tomorrow. We have to actually participate with the community. We have to educate the community. When something like this happens, we'll find them actually supporting us, not will be against us. So we need to start now to train them in the future technologies. We need to let them know those minorities actually part of this plan, either Black, Latinos, others. Then we go back to the source of those students, where they're going to come from. They're going to come from HBCU. They're going to come from MSI. Then we have to introduce this type of technology to the community, to the parents, to the public, to let them know what type of technology I'm talking about and how we can improve this type of technology. So early on in my life, I learned that hands-on training and the minds-on training, one of the most important key element to prepare minorities. So when I went to Dillard University after Alabama A&M University, I established actually great labs over there supported by the Army and the Air Force. And this is where, if you come to that lab, you will not think Dillard University had this type of technology. We are one of the undergraduate institution at HBCU, which we have 3 patents, and we have 9 patents actually applied for it. So we are the only HBCU university without a graduate program has patent. And this is where we train our students. This is where we train them, we give them the knowledge, we give them the hands-on training, we give them the minds-on training. So this is make a great impact on their life. Now they graduate, they have all the essence and the technology, the training, which they can go to graduate school, or they can go to the task force. Anybody will accept them. Where our students, it's everywhere, from NASA to the Navy to Boeing to Fermi Lab. They are working there, they are leaders there. It's not just giving them a desk to sit and sign papers. No, they are in the decision making. And this is what we need to show actually minorities they can do it. They have to be part of this discussion. They have to be part of our plans. So always people, they ask me, how can we thank you for that? I said, nothing. Just to find somebody who needs the help and give him the same help which we actually needs for to be one like you. And always I say, it's not how much you can take. It's how much you can you leave behind when you go. It's a building legacy. And this is something which every one of us around this table has to do it actually, to think how we can build a legacy when we go.
Thank you. Anne, would you like to?
Absolutely. I think that this role of training the workforce, the role of our universities, our community colleges, our vocational schools, the role of retraining programs for workers who are affected by the energy transition. This is really essential to put a focus on. And you mentioned graduate school. We need these talented students to come in for PhDs in physics and engineering. Fusion also needs highly skilled mechanics, technicians, electricians. We need lawyers, we need policy experts, we need communication experts, we need behavioral scientists, social scientists, folks who can think about siting, manufacturing, and supply chain development, We need everyone to come to the table because we need the people who are going to be building, in every sense of the word, a transformational new energy source in a global economy. And at this horizon, we've got to embrace DEI, and we've got to bring everyone in.
So how do we facilitate this energy transition in a way that will, mitigate the impacts of climate change, but also set up investment opportunities in disadvantaged communities?
It's a big question, and I know we don't have time to get into it, and other panels will. But as you mentioned, Kim, it's about a new type of ecosystem, not just for research, but also for deployment, because we want the fusion plants to be built in the USA, made in the USA, and we want those to be the ones that you buy, Dr. Berry. And so fusion and this new energy industry can create jobs, really good jobs in this country.
So we talked about the need for diversity for technical success. I'm interested in your perspectives on how we can leverage this diverse workforce to create public acceptance and really enhance the overall economic competitiveness of fusion. So perhaps, Steve, you might comment.
Getting to commercial fusion needs astonishing innovation. And why would you tie your hand behind your back and not exploit all of the talent that America has, right? That's just the bottom line, right? We're not doing it. We're not doing it as well as we should do, and we need to do better. The innovations, as a foreigner, one of the things I find about America is that the cultural melting pot is one of the greatest forces for the creativity that this country has, right? We're not doing well enough in the scientific enterprise to exploit that. That's just
Perhaps as the one who has to take it to the community, Mark, you could comment for us.
Yeah, these have been very interesting discussions on this panel, and I want to tell you why intentionality is imperative. If a utility is going to build a fusion facility, it's going to take an elected official to approve you building that facility. And it's going to take a community welcoming that technology. You know, when you build a facility, it's going to be a part of the fabric of that community for decades, 5, maybe 10 decades. And when you think about it that way, it really makes you realize how much we need intentionality in this space. At some point, there's going to be a grandmother or a school teacher that's going to be in a public meeting saying if they want this technology in their community. Now is the time to build that type of support. It takes intentionality and inclusion to do that. I would encourage this type of public and private partnership to think about the end in mind and how much inclusion is needed.
And that's fantastic. So we're coming up to the end of our panel, but we have a few questions that have come in from email, so I'm going to try to get 1 or 2 of them in. How can fusion R&D leverage fission R&D experience, infrastructure, partnerships, and regulations? Anyone?
Yeah, so I'll be happy to answer that. I've actually spent about half my career in fusion and half my career in fission, and my fusion career has been in fusion technology. There are many synergies. There are materials issues that are common to both. Fission is an extreme environment as well. A little higher energy neutrons in the fusion environment, but we need to learn from that. In addition, when we look at blanket designs, that type of thing. So what I would argue is with respect to what needs to be done moving forward, lots of synergies. We ought to be able to be working, we ought to be working together to get to where we need to be for a commercial plant. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll stop there.
Oh, that's great. So I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll wrap up. If money were no object, and I think we heard that maybe soon money won't be an object, what would you do differently? Any thoughts? National lab directors always have thoughts.
spend it at Princeton. No, no. I think there are probably 4 or 5 really promising ideas that might make it to fusion, commercial fusion. And the difficulty will be choosing between them. If money was no object, this is like in the Manhattan Project, you had to separate uranium. We'll try everything that we need to do. That's probably what we would do if money was no object, and try and accelerate. The sooner we have fusion, right, the better our prospects for going to net zero. And so we have to do it.
And I think that's a great note to finish on. And the analogy to the Manhattan Project, I think, is apt. These are the moments where the U.S. is great. This is where we really thrive. There's a really important problem. It requires over-the-horizon S&T to come together now. It requires new types of partnerships. It requires everyone to pull together to really drive this forward. It requires the government to come together across agencies to coordinate, to drive this innovation and to give us a real sense of urgency behind this problem. So I am personally confident that this community can rise to meet this challenge, and I look forward to doing it with all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boudil and distinguished panelists. There were many inspiring and great words there for us to build on. Since we're running a little behind, I think we're going to launch ahead. People who need to take a short break, please feel free to do so. I'd like to welcome the second panel, on energy justice and public engagement. As Dr. Nelson spoke at the outset, it is very important that Fusion is engaging in these discussions starting right now. This panel is moderated by Dr. Seth Hadel, President and co-founder of the Post Road Foundation, which is a nonprofit that supports the development of sustainable infrastructure for underserved communities. Okay, Dr. Hadel, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Scott. Thank you all for joining us at this exciting event. And thank you for joining us at the Energy Justice and Public Engagement panel. This is perhaps an unusual panel for a Fusion event. 5 or 10 years ago, all we would hear about is the technical advances, is what we heard in the last panel. But today, Fusion researchers, developers, and advocates, just like other energy innovators, they really recognize that emerging energy sources like fusion have a responsibility to meet the needs of all Americans. They understand that there's more to energy than just technical viability, economic viability, and regulatory compliance. And they understand that the way in which energy technologies are deployed can have really profound societal implications. So the fusion industry will need to do more than create reactors that have net energy gain, even though that will be an incredible event. But it'll still need to do more. And it'll need to do more than create reactors that are approved by the NRC, even though that would also be wonderful. And it needs to do this so that the fusion industry can scale, it can be internationally competitive, and it can meet the needs of all Americans. And so that it can achieve the impact for climate change, energy independence, and national security in which it strives. And so in other words, the fusion industry, to achieve these great impacts, will need to pay attention to social acceptance, like we've heard, energy justice, public engagement, and the just transition, and other aspects of energy ethics. And I'm really heartened that these issues have been brought forward from the start of today by Secretary Granholm, Dr. Nelson, and Ms. Mallory, and have placed these issues central to the development of fusion and our discussion today. So these issues, they apply to all energy technologies. It's not unique to fusion, but I think fusion has at least 2 advantages. First, its unique and groundbreaking features, it really means it can have a positive impact beyond simply keeping the lights on and lowering greenhouse gas emissions. But second, and perhaps most importantly, fusion is so young, given its current early state of commercial development, that it really has an opportunity to distinguish itself from other energy technologies, not just in the way that it uses physics, but in the way that it approaches society. I think this is a wonderful opportunity. So to give us an introduction to these issues and how different stakeholders, both within and outside of the fusion community, can contribute, we have an esteemed panel. So we have Ms. Shalanda Baker, Senior Advisor at the Department of Energy, Dr. Matt McKinsey, Senior Director at the Natural Resources Defense Council, Professor Stephanie Diem, Assistant Professor of Engineering Physics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Ms. Amy Roma, a partner at Hogan Lovells, and Ms. Amelia Chambliss, a soon-to-be PhD student at Columbia University. So we've organized this panel into 5 themes. We have 5 minutes per theme. So, with that warning, the first theme I'd like to explore is energy justice and environmental justice. And both of these aspects of energy ethics are really concerned with the distribution of benefits and harms of energy technologies, particularly as that distribution pertains to marginalized and disadvantaged communities, whether it's here in the US or abroad. Unfortunately, historically, the origin of this issue is that polluting energy facilities and their supply chains have often been located in marginalized, low-income communities with detrimental impacts on health and human development. And fusion, because it's this clean, compact, amazing energy source, it has the potential to address these issues in a very positive way. And so my first question to Ms. Baker is, given the positive aspects of fusion, can commercial fusion help restore communities that have been so impacted disproportionately by pollution and environmental injustice?
Great. So I just want to say good morning, first of all, and this has been such an incredibly exciting day. I stopped myself a couple of times because I thought, what if we had done this at the launch of every major technological innovation that we've had in this country? How just would our society be? How would communities that are on the front lines of climate change, the front lines of environmental hazards and harms, how would their lives be different had we integrated issues of equity and justice into the conversation on day one? So you ask me if this technology can actually help to create restorative justice. And the answer, as a lawyer, is it depends. So in my view, it only can create restorative justice if we are absolutely engaging communities on day one. But as the eloquent speakers on the former panel stated, we've got to weave in diverse perspectives from the very beginning, beginning with the R&D, beginning with the corporations that will be engaged in this, making sure that the boards are diverse, that staff is diverse as well, that the researchers are also diverse. But we absolutely must be engaging communities, thinking about how they come to the table. So let me just put on my professorial hat for just one moment. I know we only have 5 minutes for this question or this theme. So energy and environmental justice have 4 distinct pillars. We start with procedural justice. So that's a seat at the table, and not just a seat at the table so that we can check a box, but it's a seat at the table that is meaningful, that there is an actual dialogue. So that's one. The second is distributive justice, and that's ensuring that the benefits and burdens of a technology, of an industry, are equitably shared, and you alluded to that in your opening remarks. The third is recognition justice, and that is actually so important. At the Department of Energy, we are now dealing with the legacy harms of many of the things that we've done to transform this nation. So we have an Office of Legacy Management in which we are engaged in communities like Savannah River to ensure that we do right by those communities. But with this new technology, we have to recognize, we have to engage in recognition justice and recognize the unique positions of those communities as we engage them with this new technology. And then fourth, the restorative justice piece, that's what you asked me about. How do we heal communities? I think there are so many ways to heal communities, and it depends on that specific community, but we do need new jobs in those communities, and we need genuine and authentic economic development. So there's a lot that I put on the table, and I know we're going to talk about a lot more things over the next several minutes.
I think those are all important points. So following up, how, practically speaking, how can the fusion community engage, start the engagement process in these, to help restore?
Yeah, I mean, it's not easy. So it's hard work, right? We have to actually understand communities where these facilities may be sited. We have to understand the institutions that will be doing the research and development with respect to this technology. But that means that you do need folks on the inside and outside. So again, your workforce has to reflect the world and the diversity of this nation. So that's step one. That allows you to get those diverse perspectives so that people can actually talk to each other, right? And ask the right questions. We also know that there's a well-established and well-developed network of environmental justice advocates, of climate justice advocates that are out there waiting to be talked to, right? And waiting to be engaged. And so I would say tapping into that network as well, and bringing those folks to the table, as well as ensuring that we have a diverse workforce that is able to speak the language of communities on the outside.
And I think we have some time more to speak about those very issues. And one last question on this theme. You might think this is, these issues are superfluous to competitiveness, but I don't think so, and I think many would argue otherwise. How do you think that these issues can help the U.S. fusion industry not just maintain international competitiveness, but really lead the development of this technology?
So let me spend about 30 seconds talking about community acceptance of technology. This was alluded to on the prior panel as well. So I entered into this field of energy justice kind of by happenstance. I was a researcher doing research in Mexico, which sort of positioned itself as being a leader in the global south with respect to transforming its economy into a clean energy economy. As a researcher, I encountered indigenous peoples in Oaxaca, Mexico, who were protesting against clean wind, right? And they were doing so because they had been displaced, dispossessed. They were not at the table with respect to the transformation of their communities. So we can't do that this time. And what occurred to me as a researcher was, if we continue to engage in the same mechanisms and methods of development that we've always done in this clean energy transition, we are going to slow ourselves down. We will not be competitive internationally. We will not be able to get this clean energy transition underway at the speed at which is required. This is a matter of life and death. This is a matter of life and death for all of us as a species, but it's also a matter of life and death for communities that rely on land, that need clean water, that don't want waste sited in their communities, so they're gonna fight. They're gonna fight. And so we have to have them at the table. We have to be engaged in authentic conversations, or else it's gonna slow us down. So it's a choice, and we have that choice here on day one.
Great. So moving on to our second theme, what I'd like to explore here is the environmental benefits and risks of this technology. You know, when I speak with plasma physicists and what we've heard this morning and what Ms. Baker just mentioned, you know, the physicists, the engineers, and the investors in fusion have climate change as their focus, also environmental justice. And so that would suggest that the fusion community and the environmental community should be partners in the development of this innovative technology as a commercial energy source. So Dr. McKenzie, I'll start with you. You know, how can the fusion community best interact with the environmental community now in a practical sense so that both communities can work together to explore the potential of this technology?
Okay, great, thank you. Good morning, I'm Matthew McKenzie. I have the privilege to work for a national environmental organization, so I'm not part of the fusion community, but I'm really grateful to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. When I think about fusion and climate change, I think about investing in new options for the future. And a lot has to be done over this century to address the threats of climate change. And that's the context in which I think about fusion as an environmentalist. A touchstone for me is what's already been mentioned, this 2021 National Academy of Sciences study, Bringing Fusion to the Energy Grid, which talked about a three-step process. So where we are now is proof of principle. The energy gain in the plasma demonstrated to be greater than 1. The next step would be a pilot plant for a system energy gain greater than 1, Q system greater than 1, and then finally a first-of-a-kind commercial plant. And so the Academy recommended that the design of the pilot plant be done in parallel with the proof of principle work that is going on today. And so I think that's a point to engage the environmental community in this design work on issues that are generic to fusion systems. So we don't know what, what core you'll plug into the pilot plant eventually, and the National Academy talked about the risk there, of course. But what issues could be generic to fusion systems that, if you wanted to, you could engage with the environmental community as part of your work? So I thought about 4 areas to propose. One is tritium management. Tritium, of course, has to be manufactured. Fusion's unique. Tritium has to be manufactured within the facility itself. So what does that fuel cycle look like? Are there lithium extraction issues that could be helpful to work out with the environmental community or talk about? And then lithium blanket fabrication. So really fuel cycle issues for fusion. The second category is the very high neutron flux. Of course, in the DT reaction, 80% of the energy is in the neutrons. So that produces activation of the reactor components. So what will that waste stream look like? And I'm genuinely asking the question, would anything have to go to a geologic repository from a fusion reactor? So having a dialogue with the environmental community about that would be great. So ITER, I'm aware, uses lots of water. The National Academy study and other studies I've read, there's discussion about what would be the water cooling of this fusion pilot plant. But if water usage could be an issue, at least sitting from where I am now, and so I think that's a great point to engage with the environmental community on water usage, water impacts. I was generally asking myself, as I prepared for this, will the pilot plant require cooling towers? I'd be interested in having that conversation. And the fourth area is the National Environmental Policy Act. just, this is the requirement for the government to assess environmental impacts prior to making a decision. And so how to satisfy the requirements of NEPA and the intent of NEPA in the federal government's role for fusion. So thank you, Seth. I hope I haven't taken too long.
No, not at all. And I think that's great that you have very concrete ways in which the fusion community can engage with the environmental community now as they're designing these plants. I think that's exactly what the community needs to hear. So thank you, Matt. Real quick on this theme, Ms. Chambliss, certainly in my generation and younger generations, it's the environmental issues that motivate a lot of what people do in their professional life. So how is it that the environmental benefits of fusion motivate students to join the community? Was that your own personal motivation, or is it watching sci-fi films?
Forgot to press the button. I think particularly Gen Z, we see a lot of folks who are very involved in anything that they can do to help with the mitigation of climate change. And I think the prospects of clean energy that fusion poses are really, really exciting to a lot of young people. And I think it's definitely going to change our workforce very rapidly. Yeah.
All right, so now, theme number 3. This I'd like to build off of what we've heard, public engagement more broadly. Now, public engagement is essential for scaling fusion. I think we're going to keep hearing this over and over again. It addresses the environmental justice and energy justice and environmental community concerns that we've heard, but it's also essential for building trust, which has also been emphasized. And it's important practically when the time comes to build power plants. We have to have the trust of the community to site some infrastructure that's going to outlive the members of the community who are making that decision. Yet, speaking as a former physicist, engagement does not come naturally to us, right? We much prefer to do the math problems and write the computer codes. So, the fusion community is starting purposeful engagement, and I think it's quite exciting. I'm actually helping RPE organize a mini workshop on social acceptance and energy ethics as part of their annual meeting for fusion awardees. And in that workshop, we'll hear about different perspectives on energy from different parts of the world. But Professor Diem, you've worked on this a lot. You're the co-chair of the U.S. Fusion Outreach Task Force. So I'd ask this question to you to start us off. How can researchers and policymakers really engage in meaningful and two-way conversations with society in which communities are given a voice, physicists and society learn from each other, and I think most importantly, the physicists learn from society and what it is that society needs and expects from them?
Yeah. Thank you so much, and I'm so excited to be here today because we're at this turning point where we can actually be forward-thinking and get ahead. I think in the field of physics and engineering, we tend to take the approach of fixing problems without consent, and this has caused harm. I quickly learned the limitations of my education, and so that's when I actually went out and got science communication training that was focused on empathy, that we need to foster these deep connections with society that are necessary to reach common ground and understand values. We need to have more meaningful and respectful two-way conversations that are inclusive, and we need to make space to work together, and we need to be honest about what we're doing. And researchers, we really need to remember that the communities are the experts in this case, and we're always going to be the learners. And we can empower communities to have ownership in their energy choices and start understanding their concerns now. So that's why I'm co-leader of the U.S. Fusion Outreach team with Dr. Arturo Dominguez. And part of what we do is we're a grassroots organization that's open to everyone that focuses on reducing the barriers to public engagement. And we actually implemented some of I think it's the first the FUSIC long-range plan recommendation that was actually executed. It's a usfusionenergy.org website that can help support this effort as well.
Is there any way that policymakers and funders can facilitate this process and make sure it's a two-way conversation and not just an educational exercise, which I think is what physicists tend to want to do.
Yes, they definitely tend to want to do that. I think previously a lot of our funding has been restricted to the science of fusion. And now that we're at this pivotal point where we're looking at a fusion energy mission, we can have funding and policymakers support that transition with funding language that we can start addressing the concerns of society, that when they're worrying about power plants in their neighborhood, are we doing the necessary research to address their concerns and listen to all of their concerns?
I think that's a very concrete suggestion. So now our fourth theme I'd like to explore is diversity and inclusion. And this has been a theme that's come out throughout this morning. And fusion will scale faster, almost certainly, if it listens to the full range of voices present in America. Engagement is one way to listen to those voices, but having those voices within the fusion community and not just outside or not just listening to them may be just, if not more, effective than that engagement process. So, Ms. Chambliss, I'd like to start this question to you, sort of elaborate on what we've heard earlier. How can researchers and policymakers facilitate new voices to join the fusion community as students, as researchers, and ultimately as power plant operators to achieve the wider objectives that we've been speaking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that there are two components to the answer to this question. I think the first is that it's really critical that we introduce folks in underrepresented communities to fusion when they're in undergrad or earlier. And the second is that it's really critical that we empower students as much as we can when they do become interested in fusion. And to the first point, I think that it's very likely that tomorrow's fusion leaders could be currently attending community college in rural Montana. And they might not have had the chance to fall in love with fusion yet because they haven't been introduced to it. And my own introduction to fusion was through a small, or rather to plasma physics, and eventually to fusion, was through a small, fairly low-cost device called a glow discharge plasma that glows pink and purple, and there are all these different beams of light whizzing around the device, and I just fell in love with it instantly. And that experimental setup was sent to my undergraduate institution, Reed College, by Dr. Arturo Dominguez at the Science Education Department at Princeton Plasma Physics Lab. And I think if Dr. Dominguez hadn't shipped that little tube of glass to Reed College, I might not know what a stellarator is today. And for those who don't know what a stellarator is, it's one of the it's one of the fusion concepts in magnetic confinement fusion that might get us to a clean energy point. And yeah, I think it's also essential that we use approachable language when we introduce undergraduates to fusion. I think there are a bunch of different ways that we could talk about the stellarator, for example, and there are fancy words that we can use like neoclassical transport or rotational transform. But at the end of the day, we can just approach students and say, hey, we're using these really crazy twisty coils that form a really strong magnetic field, and we're using that to trap star stuff. And we are trying to use that star stuff to solve one of the greatest problems that humanity has ever faced, and that's climate change. And I think if you say it the right way, who doesn't want to do that for work every day? And to the second point in terms of empowering students, when I became a SULI intern at the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, which SULI is a Department of Energy internship available to undergraduates, not only did I encounter what research is really like day to day, and it turned out to be completely different than I thought. It's so fun and wildly collaborative and creative and really exciting. But I also encountered an incredibly supportive environment. And in particular, my PI on one of the stellarators that I was working on, Dr. David Gates, was really supportive in helping me understand my role in the fusion community and my role as a researcher. And I think members of underrepresented communities tend to shut doors for ourselves before they even open. And I had sort of just assumed that I wouldn't get into graduate school. I assumed that I should just not apply because I won't even get in. And Dave, or Dr. Gates, he told me that that was false, and it turned out to be so. But yeah, I think that it is really the responsibility of folks in management, whether they're PIs or CEOs, to talk to undergraduates and new hires and really show them that the fusion community will be so much stronger if they are able to both be themselves as passionately as possible while they pursue something that they really love.
That's great. I think practical suggestions, again, wonderful. So Professor Diem, you've also thought about this issue, but from sort of the other side, how do you recruit?
Right. So part of it is transparency and making job opportunities more open to everyone. Oftentimes there's gatekeeping that happens in fields. It's networking, you know the person who has a job open, and we're trying to break down barriers of that in our field. So part of what we did to make the field more equitable in fusion and provide more opportunities is in usfusionenergy.org website, we host jobs from every institution that does fusion. And by jobs, I mean every kind of job in the fusion ecosystem that requires any level of training, from high school certificates, bachelor's to PhDs. And that's so everyone can find it with one quick search. So, yeah.
And Ms. Baker, we'd love to get your insight as well.
Sure, thank you so much. And I'm so inspired by this panel. Really appreciate all the remarks. I want to go back to the last question just for 1 minute and highlight the fact that this is really a social technical transition. So that means we're transforming our society as we're bringing these new technologies online. And it means that yes, we want physicists to be able to talk to people, but we also need to build interdisciplinary teams. There are plenty of social scientists who know how to talk to people, and so we need funders in the philanthropic space to fund those interdisciplinary teams. I know at the Department of Energy, we're thinking about ways to build interdisciplinary teams as well. So I just wanted to make sure I landed that point for all the people who have the ability to move the needle on that. And with respect to this question, you know, today, an 8-year-old kid has no idea that we're having this conversation, right? And in 10 years, if we're going to really land this decade, that 8-year-old will be going into college. What are the opportunities that will be available for him, right? What are the opportunities that are going to be available? If we don't see the diversity that we want in the field today, we actually have to build it. And so we need to be building that over the next decade so that that kid has an option. And so for the corporations out there that are, you know, wanting to be a part of this and understand that having a diverse workforce will create a competitive edge, partner with universities, build programs, invest in universities, invest in chairs so that that chair can then attract researchers, postgraduates, and build an undergraduate curriculum that is going to attract a diverse array of students. So we want to make sure that that 8-year-old has options and has an ability to be a part of this this transition. So that's my contribution. We need more money in universities. Bottom line.
But I think the call out for multidisciplinary teams is essential. That's really important to get different perspectives, even at the professional level. Absolutely. So last theme, last but not least, for sure, I'd like to explore the regulatory framework for fusion. The appropriate regulation is incredibly important. In order to scale, the public has to have confidence that the regulatory regime will ensure health and safety and cover the full range of risks. You know, those are risks that are specific to fusion, such as fuel handling, waste disposal, and powerful magnets. But those are also risks common to any industrial facility, like pressurized gases. And the public also has to have confidence that the regulations themselves, of course, are enforced. It's not just enough to have them, but they have to be enforced. So, and yet an uncertain approval process and overbearing regulations could slow down the industry. It could really, it could be a disaster. So, Ms. Roma, how are regulators worldwide approaching regulating fusion? Do they have the tools they need to create this appropriate regulatory framework that's neither too restrictive nor too light touch? And to bring it here to the U.S., does the NRC have the flexibility it needs, or does Congress need to reform it in some way?
Thanks so much, Seth. And Shalanda, I just want to start off by saying at least one 8-year-old is watching, because my son Finn is watching. So hey, baby. And hopefully he can take the lessons learned and bring it back to the rest of the 4th graders that he goes to school with. And so I want to start by bringing this back up to the big picture, right? So we're looking at one of the biggest problem-solving projects that mankind has to come together and work for, which is decarbonization and climate change, and how we're going to address that. Currently, the majority of power around the world is generated overwhelmingly from fossil fuels. At the same time that we need to decarbonize the existing power supply that we have nearly 1 billion people in the world that don't have access to electricity, and we need to give them electricity, and hopefully it's clean electricity. We also have the EIA estimating that our global electricity demands are going to double by 2050. So we have a huge opportunity here with fusion. If it can be clean, reliable, and affordable, to be a transformative energy source to combat climate change and to be clean energy to the nearly 1 billion people who don't have access to it right now. At the same time, we're working with a lot of companies that are at their foundation and they're just emerging. And so they can incorporate the lessons learned and what everybody in this room is saying about the importance of diversity and inclusion, environmental justice, energy justice, and climate change more broadly into your business practices. And companies don't operate like they used to. Now, many companies have ESG policies where they take into account the environmental impact that they have on their community, that they work and ensure that they have diversity and inclusion programs, and that they work with their local communities and their stakeholders to ensure that their voices are heard and that they offset any negative impact with positive impacts. And that could be something as simple as teaming with a local college or university and getting someone who's as awesome as Amelia so that she's now entering a PhD program at Columbia. I mean, imagine where your life could have been if you didn't have that one person who took the time to say, hey, you can do this. Or the person who said, hey, I'm going to send this device over to Reed College, and hopefully you get a chance to see that. And so there's a broad ecosystem here, and name check to Ann White for saying we need lawyers, so I appreciate that, but it's lawyers, it's the people that work with the kids, the community activists, it's the grassroots organizations, it's organizations like Matt and NRDC. And you also have your regulators. You have the organization whose job is not to promote your industry, but to make sure that the public health and safety and public defense and security are protected. And so right now, we're at an inflection point with the regulatory framework. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the U.S. are kind of at the early stages of looking at what is the appropriate regulatory framework for fusion. And they're doing the approach the way they should be, which is looking at the technology and assessing the technology and getting an appreciation for the risks that it introduces to see how they could right-size their regulatory framework. They're not taking an existing framework and trying to shoehorn it in. They're looking at it more broadly to figure out how should it be regulated. And we're seeing the UK's doing the same thing. So they've developed a white paper suggesting they approach a regulatory framework that's much more akin to a byproduct materials, radioactive materials licensing framework. That needs to be adjusted for the unique characteristics of fusion. But I've been participating in a number of International Atomic Energy Agency Commission workshops on how to regulate fusion. I want to say there's 4 so far that I have scheduled this year, including one last week, where a lot of the group discussion was really very nuclear fission focused and not on fusion. And to me, that can be a bit of fitting a square peg in a round hole. And there's obviously huge amounts of symmetries that you can borrow from, such as evaluating like materials segregations. But when you're looking at what your framework should be, I think it's important to start from the technology and work your way out rather than start from what you have and work your way in.
It's great that the regulators are thinking broadly. Are there any actions that the regulators can take to support the social acceptance, energy justice, and other issues that we've discussed?
Yeah, so that's actually really interesting because, again, we keep talking about how this is such an important moment. This is also an important moment for how regulators are viewing what the role of looking at energy justice and environmental justice are from their perspective. And so for an organization like the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, they're an independent government agency. So when President Biden issued a series of executive orders asking agencies to take a look at how they review things like environmental justice and the work that they do, an agency like the NRC doesn't have to accept that. But they voluntarily did and said, you know what, we're going to take a fresh look at environmental justice and see how we should be incorporating it and looking at it in terms of when we pursue our licensing actions. So they've had an environmental justice policy in place since President Clinton issued an executive order in 1994, and then they had a series of case laws come out that pertain to environmental justice, and then they developed an environmental justice policy statement. But they're taking a fresh look at it now to figure out, how should we look at it and where do we look at it? And they already have an existing framework in NEPA, which Matt mentioned earlier, but that's the National Environmental Policy Act, which asks a federal agency that has to take a licensing action or take a major federal action to take a hard look at the impacts on the human environment that action would have. And that involves a whole range of activities from what are the environmental impacts, the groundwater usage, the impact on the flora and fauna, as well as the socioeconomic impacts of your project, the environmental justice impacts of your project, and they look at it for the good and the bad, and climate change as well. So climate change is folded in. And so for a project like a fusion project, you could say, okay, well, climate change, we don't have greenhouse gas emissions. This is going to be a positive impact because of climate change. But you also have to look at, other things that you're doing as well that the agency needs to evaluate. And the purpose of NEPA is twofold, right? It's not just so that the agency takes a hard look and understands and appreciates the actions that it's taken and the consequences on the human environment of those actions, but it's also to provide the information in order for the stakeholder community to be more engaged in the process. And so there's a great element there in reaching out to local communities, bringing them early on in the process, and having them have a voice in the development of these projects.
That's great, although NEPA would be maybe later in the process than where the fusion community is now. But
you
certainly
need the major federal action. But there can be, DOE may have NEPA for some of the actions that it's taking to support fusion projects. So every agency has this obligation when it takes a major federal action.
Yep. We have a very small, by comparison, DOE grant, and we have to go through NEPA. It's just a software product. So one last question, and then we'll wrap up. And this is to the panel broadly by email. What efforts should be taken now to support the public trust in early fusion licensing and regulation? Maybe this is really for Amy and for Matt.
I'll do quick because you're probably going to have more to say. So I think right now education and engagement are key. You can't just assume that you're a company and you can develop a project in parallel, or you're the government agency and that you can just sit in your silo, because that's not how things work in practice. And I think the gentleman from Southern Company who spoke earlier said you are going to be building a facility in a community, and you're going to have the community signed on for your project. You're going to have your elected stakeholders sign on for the project. You're going to want to be a good citizen in that community. The earlier you can factor that in and build trust with your local community, the much better job you're going to have with the success of your project overall.
And I would just add to take the time to communicate about nuclear weapons proliferation aspects to fusion. These are incredibly troubling times. Nuclear weapons are in the news. And for fusion, safeguarding a fusion facility against its misuse to create nuclear weapons is very straightforward. You would not have any reason to bring fissile material into a fusion power plant. And so there would be things to work out in terms of nuclear non-proliferation safeguards, and the fusion community industry will have to work those out eventually. But the non-proliferation story of fusion, I think, is worth communicating.
That's great. Well, I think with those concrete suggestions, we have to wrap up. But thank you so much. And what I really like about this panel is not just that we raise these issues, but that I think we actually have real practical takeaways that the community and the funders can implement and go forward on this important issue. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Hadel, and the scintillating panel. Thank you again. So to keep things moving, we would like to proceed directly to the third and last panel. And this one is on the fusion industry vision. This panel will be moderated by Dr. Carly Anderson, a partner at Prime Movers Lab, which invests in breakthrough scientific startups. And so I invite Dr. Anderson and the distinguished panelists up to the table. Floor is yours.
All right, and with that, let's begin Act 3 of this really awesome set of sessions we've got today. Thanks, Scott, for the introduction. Really excited to be here with some of the leaders of the companies who are making this vision a reality. So going down the line, we've got Andrew Holland, the CEO of the Fusion Industry Association, David Kirtley, the founder and CEO of Helion Energy, Bob Mumgard, the co-founder and CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems. Thanks for leaning forward for me. We've got AJ Cantor, Chief of Staff at Zap Energy. We've got Michael Binderbauer, co-founder and CEO at TAE Technologies. And last but not least, Greg Pfeiffer, founder and CEO at Shine Medical Technologies. And as we get started, really just can't emphasize enough how critical the people are to making this vision a reality. The entrepreneurs we have on stage and in this audience, the policymakers in the room, we've got the scientific community we heard from earlier, the regulators, the U.S. manufacturing, research, engineering companies, private capital, and the citizens and stakeholders who have supported fusion research for the last 70 years and have really enabled the U.S. to lead. We just heard some really amazing concrete ways in which we can pull people in and make this community even bigger. So I thought we'd start by reflecting on that and see if we can get some of these companies to share what they're working on, what they're doing to promote diversity and energy justice at their organizations. David, let's start with you.
Great, thank you. DEI is a critical issue for us. I think what I tell my team is the problem we're solving is tremendously challenging. And requires an enormous amount of innovation. You're going to hear from the panel here, and you've already heard today about a diversity of technologies, diversity of ideas, but the kind of innovation that this requires, one type of brain isn't going to do it. And so what I tell my team is that for every decision we're making, we need to bring together different ideas, people from different backgrounds, different educations, to solve those problems. And so it's been a focus of Helion's from the beginning. It's good to say that our board of directors and our executive team are all primarily minorities, but we don't do nearly enough throughout the organization at all. I can give you some stats of our sort of passive incoming candidates we see about on the mechanical engineering. I like to pick on my mechanical engineers. About 10% of our applicants are women engineers in mechanical engineering, and technicians, it's less than 1%. It's absolutely astounding. And so the pipeline, the workforce, the way we support it, Shalanda, I think we're going to give you a call, it is a big deal. And we need to work on doing better at the hiring practices as well as helping support that pipeline.
Andrew, do you want to chime in on?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something for the whole fusion industry as a whole. And we have 27 member companies, and we do an annual survey. And part of that annual survey is to look at what's the both gender diversity and racial diversity within the workforces. And so the first thing you have to start with is knowing where you are. And so in 2021, we found it was 22% female, 78% male, which is broadly reflective of where the tech and high science field is as a whole. We need to do better. Racial diversity is actually harder to quantify because we couldn't quite normalize it across international borders and what racial hierarchies are and all that sort of stuff. So we've got the numbers, but we're trying to figure out how to actually do that, and we'll do better on that in our 2022 survey. But what we've done is we've started a FIA Inclusion and Diversity Committee to share best practices across the industry. And we also know that we need to invest in a workforce and partnerships that will attract these. But the other thing I'd say is that, we hear a lot about diversity in sort of PhD programs and stuff like this. But it's important to remember that private sector jobs are not just diplomas, they're also hard hats. So, this is an important place, an important way as we build things, and the fusion industry is building things now and will be building things a lot more, that this is, we have to just get the whole workforce and think about it in a broader sense as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Andrew. Anyone else want to chime in? I'm going to let you, Bob, go for it.
Yeah, it's something that's really, really important, and we like to say inside CFS that, why is fusion so like science fiction-y, right? It's science fiction-y because it's post-natural resource. It's human resource. If you know how to build this, you solve resources and all the problems that resources, those that have it, those that don't, have. But that means you have to have the right people, and you have to be able to scale that human resource globally. So it's got to be broad. So when you talk about like inclusion, and we've now in a community are building a greenfield facility, a fusion facility, 100 megawatts of power, 20 times more than JET, on the ITER sort of platform. Concrete going in right now in that community where we started years ago, talking to everybody in that community and going out proactively so they knew what this was about, what we wanted to bring into that community and what we wanted that community to partner with us on. That's community colleges, that's the local kayak club in the river next door, right? And that's talking about not just we're building a machine, but we're building a community here of somewhere like 1,000 people, of technicians, of people that are putting things together. And that's gonna come from an economic development area. So how do you get all those people on board? And you do that by actually going out and building things. And we're at the cusp of seeing a whole new revolution in doing that. And the company's up here, $4 billion, that's gonna turn in to people and things in like the next 3 years. And so how we do that right and set this up for the long term, like really, really, really high leverage right now.
Thank you, guys. I think those are some great comments on knowing where we are today, on hiring practices, and on engaging in the community, starting those early steps of some of the things that we discussed in that last panel. And I really appreciate, again, those concrete suggestions that I know everybody is taking notes on. Greg.
Yeah, just one thing I would add that we've had some success with, and even though our numbers don't look great, like most people I assume here, but measuring and then creating an annual report and putting it out on our website actually has been it might seem like the numbers might cause people of DEI backgrounds to avoid you, but actually really like the fact that you're measuring and admitting that you have a problem and trying to do something about it. So it's just a tip maybe for people.
Great, thanks. Now I want to pull on one of the threads that Bob brought up on scaling, right? The first panel went into in great depth why this is the time from a scientific standpoint. I want to pull on that from the industrial standpoint. Why is now the time to lean in? What's changed? And I'd like to begin with Michael. I know you've had a broader view on this industry than many, so please.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's first of all, it's an extremely exciting time, as we heard earlier, and I'm sorry I missed the early part, but I've had conversations with all the folks on the panel, so I know the topic, of course, well. I think we're in an incredible point where the science and the technology are starting to meet up with the challenge. And I think what the private sector is bringing is the ability to take that into the vision and the direction that we need to make a practical power plant. You know, I used to work in the university with my PhD mentor, and then ultimately some postdoc time, and then we started TAE back in 1998, and we had very little idea at that point what it would take to do this, right? So the journey is enormous. You go through the stages of first sort of saying you can do this in a few years, and then you sober up, and you know, I liken this to climbing a mountain. You get out of the fog of the inversion layer, and suddenly you see the summit is way up there. And you know, that's technology. In fact, for us, it was 20 years of just a bear of making technological components work at a level that they just weren't ready. And I think that's probably, in my perspective, my life lesson, the thing we learned the most on. But what's exciting now I think we've conquered a lot of these things, and they're getting really, really ready. And I think what you see in the private sector is that is not just a journey in of itself, but it connects tightly with an end product we're trying to develop, right? We're talking about building not science projects, but actually delivering energy. And that means you're going to have to build applied things that will work reliably and cost effective. And I think this is where, when you have choices, when you do science, and you have choices about what technology vector you pursue, where when you look at this with this end game in mind, it just sometimes drives you in a very different direction. And frankly, one that I didn't appreciate either. But we got there through a very disciplined process. And I think this is where the augment comes when the academic side and the national labs work together with those that are really feeling the burden of having taken private money and supposed to deliver a product. I think there's a great synergy to drive this to a very focused sort of pathway to get there fast.
Yeah, as private capital, we want you to make a product and sell a lot of it. That's very important, yeah. And I really appreciate Kathy McCarthy's comments earlier on. This has to be competitive. Like, we are not here, private capital is not here. These companies are not here because this is exciting and it will solve climate change. It will, and that's partially why we're here. But we're here because there is a business opportunity here to really create the economy of the 21st century, and we want to be part of it. Maybe, AJ, I know you've also spent time in the private sector. Do you want to comment on what's different now?
Yeah, quite a bit is different now. There's a reason we're all here. I think one of the kind of major contributors to the growth of all these companies has been the fact that fund sizes have grown in venture, and you need to make really big bets in order to return that fund. This is one of the few industries where you can build really megalithic companies. And we're defining an entirely new industry here. And so folks are really starting to, I mean, over the course of the last couple of years, there's been a growing proclivity toward frontier tech in general. But the confluence of both that proclivity toward frontier tech as well as the growing fund sizes has really translated to venture capital being willing to put money behind this stuff.
Awesome. Thanks for that perspective. All right, I'd like to shift the discussion towards, we've got this great vision, we see it, we've all been talking about it all day. How do we get there, right? And how can the U.S. government best support the efforts in this space that you all are doing? Maybe let's start with you, Greg.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we have a little bit of our own approach to commercializing fusion. We're sort of looking at applications that sort of have the highest value per reaction, highest value per neutron initially to build a sustainable company. Hopefully that can sort of withstand a lot of the tests I think we're going to have to go through to actually successfully commercialize fusion energy. So that's sort of a thought, I guess, for everybody in here is if the road ends up being a little bit longer and harder than we thought, maybe we look at some other applications where we can really add value. Certainly what we've been focused on. I think with respect to the government, we've been lucky enough to be part of NNSA's cooperative agreement program for producing medical isotopes, and we're building what I believe will be the largest medical isotope production facility in the world, which will use fusion as an underpinning for how we actually produce these products, which is really kind of neat. Might actually be the first large-scale application of fusion in human history. So that's really cool. But that program's been really helpful. It's a commercialization program. Really, it's a cost matching program. So you've got to have the private capital to match any public investment. You've got to be able to convince private investors that it's worth supporting. So I like that from a taxpayer perspective. But it's also provided us very good access to the national laboratories and the expertise they've developed in radiochemistry and nuclear physics, et cetera, over the years in an open source way. So in other words, any of that expertise where the labs might be working with us to de-risk certain aspects of our technology is available to everybody and published immediately when the work is done. So I think that could potentially be a model for how the government could engage with the private sector as we push to commercialize applications of fusion.
Yeah, it's great hearing about programs that have already shown success, like yours had. And I also wanted to definitely double-click on that open source publishing, those themes, especially as investors who have to do due diligence. It's so helpful to have information out in the broader community, vetted by other organizations, the national labs, third parties. Just wanted to double-click on that. Bob, I know you've also had experience with government programs.
Yeah, I think, what can the government do to accelerate the commercial fusion effort? The first is clarity, right? First, we have to decide where we're all going. And fusion power plants, those are products that serve customers, that have research that underpins them, that has a workforce. And if we all understand what that whole picture looks like, and we all know where we fit, we have clarity on how we fit, that is really, really powerful in and of itself. And we're just starting to see that. We're going from a world where it was only academic. and we built experiments, one-offs. We didn't really understand what the private companies were doing until the world was, oh, we see where we slot in. We see this ladder. The second part, you have to have clarity where you are. Second part is you need to be bold. We have to say we have an objective to go to. And that's what this type of a event is really, really good at, where we can come up with a policy, a national policy that says all the disparate pieces, you know where you are, go there. 10 years, put pilot plants working in the United States, multiple ones that aren't just one-offs, but can be built over and over again, that can incorporate the latest science and technology. And we know that we can do that as a nation because we've done it over and over again. This starts the same way it always starts, whether that's things like the Manhattan Project and Apollo, or what's happened with commercial space recently, or how we've done things in neuroscience. And so look to those areas to fill in the details, but most importantly, get that big vision and clarity together on it.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I think we've seen several really amazing examples in the last 2 decades, from the Human Genome Project to the COTS program, bringing down the cost of space launches. I'm sure we'll go into those more in the breakout sessions later. Andrew, do you want to comment from a broader industry perspective?
Yeah, I think so, because it goes to the broader direction that the whole industry is wanting to go. We are an industry backed by private capital, venture capital. And so there is a limited time frame that investors have. They want to figure out a way to return their money. So in our survey that I mentioned before, 93% of the fusion companies around the world expect to see commercial fusion in the 2030s or before. So that's a really important thing to think about, because we hear, sometimes that, there's a lot of problems and there's a lot of things you can do. Well, we have roadmaps, and we've talked about what these roadmaps are, and now we hope that we now have a real partner in the government in getting through all of those things in the roadmap. But the vision here is, right now, companies, some of the companies next to me and some of the others around the country and around the world, are building proof of concept machines that will show that fusion works. We call this our Kitty Hawk moment. Not the time when you sell the airplane, but the time when the airplane flies. And then they're going to rapidly, already planning, already thinking about what these pilot plants look like. And I've really appreciated the Southern Company being here and talking about wanting to be partners in those, because a pilot plant needs to have a partner with the people who are going to buy it, the companies who are going to buy it. And a shout out to Southern Company, because they literally just joined the Fusion Industry Association last week. So thanks Southern Company for joining as an affiliate member. It is really important. They're actually our second utility. TVA was first. But it's really important to be building that and getting those groups together. So as they build pilot plants, then they're going to start selling it to customers. And so that means by the 2030s, we are scaling up and turning this into not a problem that's a scientific problem or even an engineering problem, but a manufacturing problem. How fast can you build? And when you turn something into a manufacturing problem, there's all sorts of levers you can turn to make it cheaper, faster, better. And so then we're just going to be iterating, and 2030s will be the decade of broad fusion deployment around the world.
Interrupt here. Speaking of timescale, I think this is probably the largest risk, actually, to us as an industry. Fusion has made promises before that have not been kept. And so it's our responsibility, folks on this panel, the companies that are really in the game right now, to actually develop the technology at a rate that's commercially pertinent. And so a lot of what we're doing, I think all of us, when we speak about boldness, we're not just talking about boldness from the government side. We're talking about boldness from the technical goals that we're setting ourselves, the resources that we're putting behind actually meeting those goals. If we don't meet these timescales, the reason that fusion has always seemed 20 years away is because there's a hype cycle and people are consistently disappointed. And if we miss these goals, we're looking at perpetuating that adage. So it's time for us to hustle.
Yeah, thanks, AJ. And I really love that focus on goals and milestones. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind is we're not just talking about speed, like a straight sprint to, it's checkpoint to checkpoint, right? We're not talking about just, we're going to draw something up on the whiteboard and build it. Like there are very clear designs. And as someone who's done a lot of technical diligence, I've gotten to see some really amazing work by a lot of the people in this room. And I think that with the U.S. government as well as the private sector, it's important for us to take that milestone-based approach. We saw that be very successful in other government programs and other industries. We'd like that to continue.
Can I add something to that? I think this is also extremely important from a funding perspective on the private side, right? There is accountability in this, and so you start with a promise, or you put a project plan together. You say you're going to deliver something in 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is. If you don't, as a private company, you're gone, right? So that's a huge motivator to deliver and to set yourself realistic goals. But in adding to milestones go forward, what I think is important too, and this gets back to what is the role of the government, what's the role of a public-private relationship. I think we're at a point now where, in our company with 250 people working for us, in our spin-offs another few hundred, but it's a pittance, it's a drop in the bucket to what you really need to pull off a full power plant. And there's been choices made by us deliberately where we're going to have focus area of strength, and there are areas where we're going to rely, and although we may have not engaged yet because the next milestone hasn't yet happened that requires that, but there's going to be the point where we want the interaction and we're counting on the help and the infrastructure that can be provided by the public side. And so when I look today at the relationships we have, for instance, with Princeton or other of the labs or some of the large university programs, those fill very critical gaps for us. It could be diagnostics, could be things related to sophisticated, back processing, computer capabilities, whatever it is. And as you go forward, and I look at the gaps that are there, so we're transitioning from the research to making, as we said earlier, a power plant that runs. There's an enormous wealth of technological lift that's going to have to happen. Some things we probably don't even know today. I'm not saying that because I don't believe that there's so many great unknowns that we couldn't do it. I believe we will all conquer this, but we need to work together, and I think we need to be coordinated. And we're going to need the help that the public resource can provide. Material science comes to mind, areas like that where, for instance, in our company, we've really made an upfront bet and said there are people who are much better, who have much deeper depth in it. Why reinvent that instead of build a relationship to do that? And so I think that there's going to be a beautiful opportunity where these things naturally scale in parallel and symbiotically.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of the topics that were covered earlier today, the blanket technology, the materials compatibility, engineering to tight tolerances, these are things that could be done to lift all boats in the fusion community and would be extraordinarily helpful.
If I could jump in and then maybe transition and talk about, yeah. So I think I'm not allowed to put a slide up with equations today, but it might be worth talking about a little math of where these products we're talking about are headed. If we really want energy security, that means we need to be tackling the scale of fossil fuels in worldwide scale. And energy justice means we need to be able to put these technologies everywhere. And so just to give you some numbers, we're talking about right now installed operating base load capacity of fossil fuels is like 3,000 gigawatts of power. And that's today. 2035, 2050, those numbers all go up. And that means that the fusion industry, the product we need to be making, if you wanted to solve this and like tackle that in even a decade, once you have your working fusion systems, that means a gigawatt a day of electric capacity that needs to come off of an assembly line. So that kind of idea, fusion's capable of it. We know the physics is capable of it. We know the engineering is capable of it. So how do we make that transition, and how do we aim our products, our government interactions, and our regulatory bodies towards that goal? And that's Helion's vision, is focused on how do you make a fusion industry and a manufacturing base and a regulatory and government interactions that can focus on accelerating this all the way up.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna shift a little bit, and I wanted to go back to what Ms. Amy Romo was talking about earlier on the regulatory side, right? This fusion industry, as David just described, this could get very, very large. This is very, very exciting. What type of a framework can you envision that would allow this to develop while maintaining the security and safety that is so important to our communities and getting communities on board? Maybe Greg, do you want to start?
Yeah, we've had some experience with this, you know, having received a construction permit and hopefully finishing the review of an operating license application for a large nuclear facility based on fusion, you know, this year. And the NRC's been good to work with. I think, you know, from my perspective, the key thing to keep in mind is just technically what is the hazard, you know, that whatever we're doing poses. I think different concepts have different hazards, frankly. And at the end of the day, the company needs to figure out what the risk to the public is and then it sounds weird, like find a regulator, but you actually need to choose the right regulatory environment that can regulate that hazard. There needs to be the technical competence within the regulator to be able to assess what we're trying to do for them to move in an expedient way. Otherwise, they're going to try and build it, and it's probably going to take a long time. You know, we're in this nuclear space where there's a combination of NRC regulation, state license, et cetera, and even different state regulators have different competencies. It varies pretty substantially. So, you know, I think the onus is really on the companies to initially kind of decide what's best for them and maybe what regulatory paradigm they could fit into. And then I think you got to engage that prospective regulator very, very early. To make sure they're on board. And we actually, my first meeting, I think, with the NRC was like 2009, like 2 years before the company was really even moving. And the NRC saw the medical isotope crisis, which we're, you know, looking to help solve coming. And, you know, they started to create draft guidance for facilities that would help solve that problem. And it was great to be part of that. And the draft guidance actually covered sort of our technological approach. So I think in the case where we end up with the NRC, where I do think there is the competence to assess a broad range of fusion facilities, you know, getting that dialogue started early, and I think the NRC should look at doing what they did, you know, with isotopes, which is to start to put it was originally draft interim staff guidance, then interim staff guidance, and they go through quite a process. So there's a nice chance to have industry input as they go through those guidance documents. So something like that I think would be really applicable here.
Thank you, Greg. And Andrew.
Well, let me comment on where we are in that process, because we are deep in the weeds right now on this with the NRC, and I really appreciate what Amy Roma said in her previous thing. The NRC is doing this right. They are taking a broad-based approach, looking at this and thinking about what is the appropriate regulatory structure. Of course, us as an industry, we have our thought as well, and our key goal here is to permanently and completely separate fusion regulation from fission regulation. And there's no good reason for there to be a legacy that fission regulation and fusion just fits under fission regulation and you change it a little bit. There's no good reason for that. There is completely different risks, completely different problems, and completely different solutions. So we're working through that, and we've been working directly with the NRC staff, directly with NRC commissioners, and doing it in public. And I think that's a really important thing, because we think that fusion is safe. We think that fusion is going to be safe, but we want to put that out to the public too. We want to hear from you to make sure that you think it's safe and what you need to hear to do this. And so, you know, I want to kind of make this case to you right now that we've been doing these NRC meetings in public over one of the virtual platforms or another, and it's open to the public. You can come, you can participate, you can ask questions, and the next one is actually next week. So 6 days from today, the NRC will be hosting another of these public forums, public meetings, and then there's going to be several more this spring. We'll have the link on our website, fusionindustry.association.org, to find it, or you can go to the NRC website. So those watching at home, please sign in, join us. We want to hear from you what you need from us to do this. And, you know, I really feel pretty good about where we're going with the NRC. They've engaged in a really open manner and trying to figure out solutions. And we're hopeful to have a good result from this that will give some sort of regulatory clarity by the end of this year. So we think we know where we're going, and then, you know, though there's a lot of work still to be done, but we feel pretty good about it. But please join us.
Thank you, Andrew. I know what I'm going to be doing in 6 days. And I think part of this challenge, and one of the really cool things, is it's not just a power. There's so many different technologies to try to regulate under one umbrella. And on that maybe topic of diversity of technical approaches and products, maybe Michael, you could mention some of what is in that spectrum.
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting. So, we started out, in fact, looking beyond tritium as a source, as a fuel source. And that seems sort of far-fetched in a way, but when you actually look at an end product, and I want to get back to that, right, commercialization. I wanted to say one thing first, and then I'm going to get to what we're doing with hydrogen boron. But if you think about commercialization and the NRC and regulation, it's a critical element, right? The time factor is a cost factor, it's a risk factor, it can be a hurdle to adoption. The other theme on this, which I wanted to reiterate a little bit, was the idea of this transparency in the process. I think it's incredibly important. And in the end of the day, our biggest adoption hurdle will be that the public thinks it's another nuclear energy source, and something's going to blow up. Or, I get always this question, I mean, you're making these things that are as hot as the sun. Are you going to burn the earth up? I mean, this is a it's not a dumb question. When you don't understand it, you would think this is possible. So a lot of education has to happen. And I think what's important to make education functional and people believe in it, in a day and age where there's a lot of sort of weird stuff out in social media and so on, having a voice that's honest and true and transparent, and in hearings like that, doing this, I think is going to be very, very critical, not just to get the regulation right, but to engage the public and have it educated and understand. And so finally, to what you asked me earlier, because I want to quickly go back to that, PB11. So we were interested in thinking about what would make a really ideal power plant. I mean, irrespective of how hard it is to get there. And there's this fuel cycle out there that uses hydrogen and boron that requires about 1 billion degrees, about a factor of 10 beyond where we're all thinking the first leg of the fusion journey will take us. But it's very illustrative to look at that, because assuming you can solve that, then you're really getting into a zone where you don't have much radioactivity, almost none. You don't have the material issues of replacing parts and so on, and there's plentiful fuel that you don't have to breed anything, it's available. So I think fusion can, and again, this isn't a journey from today to tomorrow, it's there, but there's an incremental journey to get to that. And so as a company, we're committed to looking at this from the really end point and come back. And so anything we do, and anything I think that most of our compatriots do, is driven by that. That's the difference between the private sector doing this and looking at it more from the academic point of where can I go next? That's maybe the most safe or lowest risk pathway.
Yeah. Big spectrum of risk, and appreciate everybody, all the different efforts that are going on. AJ, do you want to comment also on other applications for fusion?
Yeah, so before I move to that, I think one thing to note is that the grid is very diverse. There are diverse number of off-takers, different demand for what the grid provides. And so the different approaches that we're taking technically translate to different reactor types. That means different output rates, that means different size reactors, that means different cost reactors, and there's a place for many different types of technologies in the grid to be able to meet market need. So that's A. In terms of, more generally, just understanding, where the market really is pushing us, I think, most folks are thinking about fusion in terms of electricity, but fusion is an energy source. It does more than just generate electricity, it generates heat. That's step A for all of us. And so applications like industrial heat, if you have a smaller, more modular reactor, are actually a very good place to enter the market in some cases.
Awesome. Thank you, AJ. And with that, we're going to switch to some questions from the audience, which is excellent. First, what type of facilities are necessary to advance the commercialization of fusion? And go lightning round here. So, Bob.
Yeah, so one thing that the private sector and the public sector agree on is that the test facilities, the tasks to be done outlined in the National Academy's report and in the FESEC report, is the right list. Those are the right facilities. That report sat on a shelf for about a year now. And if we wanted to go fast, we'd pull that out, and what would you do with unlimited money? You'd go through that list and you would put those facilities together as fast as possible. No rules, as fast as possible. But that's not enough. You also have to build the commercial facilities, the things that show it works, that a customer can walk around and see, I can see that, I can put a person in this facility to learn how to operate it. I can understand how this fits into my roadmap. And those are the facilities that most of the private companies are currently building. And so we actually have the plans for the facilities at the blueprint level in many cases, ready to go. And so I hope out of this, we can make commitments to do those.
I want to, tacking on to that, fusion is a global need, but how can the U.S. create a fusion-friendly environment? What is the industry wish list? We just heard the facilities in the FESAC report, commercial facilities. Anything to add from this group? Greg?
I mean, public-private partnerships. So we're really excited that Congressman Beyer and Congressman Fleischman were here to talk about the new milestone-based public-private partnership. So that's really the ability of the Department of Energy and our private companies to work together directly in that. It's really important. We, FIA, when we first came into existence as a small initiative in 2018, that was one of the first things that we said we needed to do. So that's on the wish list, regulatory environment, and then just a go fast attitude and get ready to go.
Yeah, I would add to that one too. So at Helion, we've been building prototypes that do fusion. We're on our 6th one now that does fusion today, and there's lots of capital out there. If you can build systems that do fusion, we made announcements of over 100 million degrees in fusion. So some of the milestones you heard earlier, and the key is to go as fast as you can, so that while we're operating our 6th, we're building our 7th generation system in Everett, and we're designing that 8th generation system all at once. And so but to do that, all of us have to work together. We need government to figure out how we can accelerate the key parts to it that we're not addressing, because as a private company, we just need to go and demonstrate technology as fast as we can. And obviously workforce development, get more diversity and inclusion, and build that workforce.
I'm going to pause you there because our next question is, how do immigration and export policies impact DEI, workforce development, and global energy justice? Michael?
Yeah, I think there's a great comment that comes to mind. Somebody earlier said that we're going to double the energy demand over the next couple of decades, right? That's true. And when you look where most of that demand is going to come from, it's actually the developing part of the world, right? And those are people who today, my son in elementary school right now, he was reading a book. It was on a little kid that got an award from the UN for putting a windmill together in Africa in a village so they could charge their cell phone at night. And he had 2 light bulbs they could light in the house instead of a candle. My son read this and said, Dad, is this really true? Is this fiction? And I said, no, this is real. There are people that don't have what we have here. Feel blessed that we do, right? So the point of this is, right, that we are going to deploy a lot of the technology in an area of the world that today is far from where we are. So we have to educate, and we have to integrate, and we have to listen to these people too in terms of bringing them up. An earlier panel talked about this, right? That is an enormous shock to the system if suddenly something like this came in. It changes their world of life, their perspectives. So you can only achieve that if you're inclusive in a way. And if you look at how we evolved over, not even going before the Industrial Revolution, but since then, all of this happened incremental. We installed the 5 terawatts or whatever we have today over about 150 years. Now we're going to compress that time frame in a couple of decades, and we're going to deploy it in areas that had none of the sort of lead up of learning, right? So I think so the theme is tightly coupled.
Yeah, intentionality.
And very, very quickly on this, I think it's really important because the government investment and the government publicity coming into this program will act as a giant magnet for interest and hopefully workforce from around the world. People who will come here to universities to study, work at national labs, and work at our companies. And I really want to kind of give a shout out here to, there was a executive order and fact sheet put out by the White House in January on action to attract STEM talent from overseas. And that is really important and a really good way to make sure that the people who come here as students can actually stay here after their time as grads, post-grads, all of that, and can work with us and don't go back and build competitor companies back in their own country. So we want to keep them here. We want the U.S. to be the global magnet for a fusion industry workforce, fusion industry investment, and it really is likely to be done.
And I can touch on export real quick. Just super quick. Yep. And just it builds on what Michael said, that we envision energy justice throughout the world, and to do that is the way the cell phone age skipped over landlines in much of the world, and we imagine that in power too. Go from coal and skip over all the intervening fossil fuel steps and go right to fusion. But to that, we need a robust export policy, where in the United States, we can be that manufacturing hub, we can export these technologies. And that's where us working hand in hand with the US government right now is how we build those export controls.
Yeah, export control regulations are a challenge in this industry, and so I don't want to sugarcoat it. I mean, I think something needs to be done when you're a startup and you're trying to move fast, and you've got to wait several months before a new employee could actually contribute, and even in that case, you might need to shield them from some of what the company is doing. It's a real challenge. So I think there needs to be overhaul there if we really want to be able to bring in people from other countries. It's a big challenge.
Just one final note before we actually wrap up. So we're talking about a very kind of end state of where this industry goes. We're presuming we've already built all of our technologies out, that we're ready to just go. But I do want to kind of bring us back to all of the work that needs to be done in the interim years in order to actually build these technologies to a level of maturity that's viable. This is taking into account, that we need to actually target products that have viable unit economics. We need to build something that's effectively deployable. And doing the engineering and the science to get there really does require partnership of all of the different resources that exist in government.
So with that, I think we will wrap up. Thank you all for doing this work, both on this panel, in this room, in offices, regulators. Thank you to everyone. I loved what Dr. Budil said earlier about the private sector bringing the energy and the urgency. Hopefully that came across in this panel. And with that, we'll close and move on to our lunch and then breakout sessions.
Okay, not quite lunch. Saving maybe the best for last here. But thank you to all three panels. Exciting set of discussions. And we, of course, look forward to continually engaging with the public and all the stakeholders about the future of fusion. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Sally Benson. Dr. Benson is the Deputy Director for Energy in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and also the OSTP Chief Strategist for the Energy Transition. It's been a great pleasure working with her and her team to co-host this event. Dr. Benson.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. Wow, this was really great. We've been working on this event for quite some time, and I will say it just worked out even better than our wildest dreams. So thank you for that. And I want to thank all of you for spending your time, the speakers, an amazing set of speakers who came together. Also, we have the room full of people. We also have people on Zoom, as well as we have the live stream. So thank you for thinking this is an important topic. We certainly do. I also want to thank our extremely dedicated team who pulled all of this together, from the Department of Energy, the National Climate Policy Office, the ONB, Council on Environmental Quality, and of course our own team here at OSTP. And I want to give a special shout out to two of my coworkers in the Energy Division, Rachel Rialfi and Costa Samaras, who really did all the heavy lifting to make this a reality. So thanks to my teammates here. So if we think about the first year in office, President Biden, he's taken bold actions on climate change. He's jump-started the American clean energy industries, and he's put us on a path to net zero emissions. But if we act boldly, as we heard today, fusion could be another clean energy success story. We've heard from the scientists and engineers that we're ready to take those next bold steps to accelerate fusion energy. And no doubt, as we've heard, there are many technical challenges remaining, but it seems the critical building blocks for making fusion power a reality appear to be in reach. We also heard from innovators in the private sector who are building prototypes today of fusion systems that provide proof of concepts for many different types of fusion power plants. And we've heard from the investment community who's really stepped up to bring these groundbreaking developments to fruition with billions of dollars in just this year alone. And we heard from the environmental justice community that we cannot make the mistakes of the past, where some communities are disproportionately burdened by pollution. And we must equitably share the benefits of these new technologies. And we've heard we need to have an inclusive conversation from day one, and I think that's what we've done. And we need a workforce that takes advantage of all Americans and looks like America. With an accelerating climate crisis and a war raging in Europe, made more complicated by global dependence on Russian oil and gas, we need innovation more than ever to secure our energy future and to stop emissions of greenhouse gases. Think about this. The amount of fusion fuel that could fill a bathtub holds as much energy as all of the oil that's produced in Russia in a single day, 10 billion barrels. Think about that, a bathtub full of fuel. So when facing a devastating energy crisis in the 1970s, America made sweeping and bold investments in electric vehicles, solar, wind, and batteries. And these audacious investments, these seemed so hard to do. Solar cost 100 times more than it cost to buy grid power. But these audacious investments were so successful. Today, solar and wind are the cheapest type of energy, and electric vehicles are certainly the coolest cars to drive. So now as we shift into higher gear to deploy these technologies at full speed, now is the time to give this next generation of clean energy technologies a running start. As we've heard, for more than 70 years, fusion scientists and engineers have worked to discover how fusion works and how to control it. As we heard today, we're getting closer to the finish line, and we need to take these next bold steps. If we work together, we can sprint over the finish line and get there first. The benefits are great, a source of emission-free electricity that we can turn on and off when and where we need it. A combined source of heat and power that provides for clean industrial processing, making hydrogen, desalinating water, and all kinds of things that we can't even imagine today. So decades from now, let's look back at this moment in this room when we acted boldly again to make the impossible possible. And we acted boldly together to make fusion energy, sunlight in a bottle, a reality. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope this is the first of many conversations that we have together. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Undersecretary of Energy for Science and Innovation, Jerry Richmond, for closing remarks.
Wow, what an amazing morning indeed. Energizing, right? We're all energized now for fusion. So I hope that all of you in the room and those watching online are as excited as we are about the energy future that includes this viable pathway to fusion energy. But I also have to say, with my role in the Department of Energy, that I am truly inspired when I see the President's commitment to energy justice and diversity, equity and inclusion presented in these discussions. This is so important, and I'm so happy that you have all affirmed that. As Secretary Granholm has said, we have a unique opportunity to build a new energy industry that's truly representative of America and fully engages the communities it's destined to serve. And it's so wonderful to hear directly from the future generation of fusion researchers. In case you missed it, Amelia Chambliss, who was a participant in our DOE SULI program, Science Undergraduate Laboratory Internships program, run by the Office of Science, which trains nearly 1,000 students at our national laboratories each year. Kudos to you. I also got my start in science at a national laboratory intern at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. It's my first job outside of Kansas, so it was quite a trip to go to Berkeley from the farm in Kansas, but a good one. So we wish Amelia great luck in her graduate studies at Columbia next fall. But let me just finish by sharing a few more details about how DOE plans to accelerate progress toward commercial fusion energy. As Secretary Granholm announced earlier, DOE is establishing a new department-wide fusion cross-cut effort, and thank you, Dr. Scott Shue, who will lead this effort as the new Senior Advisor for Fusion Energy on my team in the Office of the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation. This coordinated effort will integrate fusion energy R&D and D activities across multiple program offices, including the Office of Science, ARPA-E, the National Nuclear Security Administration, and the Office of Nuclear Energy. This is needed to make sure our investments are collectively advancing a bold decadal plan for commercial fusion energy. And our efforts will be guided by the 2021 National Academy's report, Bringing Fusion to the U.S. Grid, and also draw from the incredible hard work of the fusion R&D community that culminated in the Fusion Energy Sciences Advisory Committee's long-range plan, Powering the Future. We will continue to rely upon the top scientific and engineering minds at the DOE laboratories and universities as a source of ideas and innovation for the future. And our work with the private sector will take on new urgency so we can find the synergy between the exciting developments in the fusion industry and the unique capabilities supported by DOE. And this will include harnessing market demand mechanisms and industry ability to move quickly so that together we can accelerate the timescale to demonstrating the viable commercial fusion. And this approach will allow us to pursue multiple pathways to get there. We need multiple pathways to get there, and to make sure that our chances of success are high in ushering in the commercial fusion industry. And so we are in the near term, we're exploring opportunities to enhance fundamental fusion research efforts that support development of a fusion pilot plant. And the fusion energy sciences funding opportunities the Secretary mentioned earlier are examples of this new approach. In addition to helping address the remaining science and technology challenges in this field, DOE will help clear the path to commercialization whatever way we can. As you may have noticed in the last month, DOE has reorganized so that we can actually go all the way from basic science, R&D, and deployment. A continuous stream across DOE that we are all committed to. It's a new day at DOE. And fusion promises to be a clean source of energy for the future. It will enable us to address our climate crisis, ensure U.S. science and technology leadership, and benefit our economy and national security. And we at DOE are here to make this happen in close partnership with the research community, private industry, and other important stakeholders. Thank you all for being here today, and now let's get to work. All right.
Okay, now it is time to close the public session. A big thank you to Drs. Benson and Richmond for their closing remarks and call to action. And Undersecretary Richmond, I'm especially excited to be working for you in your office, driving this effort forward, helping to drive this effort forward. So as I said, this closes the public portion of the White House Summit on developing a bold decadal vision for commercial fusion energy.